Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 241. Takes you home. Should we really be here then? We are just Slav employees, right? Mary whispered to Jane, but Seth heard it. I know we didn't interact too much lately, but you are still valuable members. I really think you more than deserve to be part of the founding members. Seth really appreciated how the girls had been taking care of Tekker's daughter. It definitely was not to make up the numbers. Now then, any good suggestions? Battlebeards. Finn was the first to shout out. But, nobody here has a beard. Link said, confused, which made Jonah's sadness visibly seep through the mask. He once had a fantabulous beard. We could grow some, the fairy kept rending the sanguine swordman's heart. Rejected, Seth said decisively to save Jonah from depression. Although he liked the beard theme, there were not enough dwarves among them to justify the name. How about bite-sized synergy? Monique said teasingly with a mischievous look at the tiny fairy. Having seen Seth and Finn eating like a pair of vacuum cleaners, she thought the name very fitting. This kicked off a brainstorming session where everyone just threw in names they liked. Blood of the Shadows, Jonah mentioned after he recovered from Finn's suggestion. Mysterious Liquidators. Link said excitedly. Magic Hawks came from Lixus. Wrecking Field, Bulko mumbled, blushing. Cunning Might was surprisingly the innocent Mary's suggestion. Shadows of Innocence was Jane's shy attempt to join the Kring Fest. Doom Shields. Tekker exposed his preferences without any shame. Spectres of the Jaguar, Catboy Mike stood in theme with their previous party name. Night Shifters, Mina suggested a cool name for an assassin's organization. It kept going for a while and Seth just kept watching. It was like having 10,000 monkeys randomly hitting on typewriters and hoping they managed to write a book essay. He just hoped they found a good name by accident. In the end, Ruby woke up from the heated brainstorming. Is everyone arguing? I thought we were Minasmar, the little girl asked innocently while rubbing her eyes. She had mistaken the name of the tower for the name of the organization. What Seth didn't expect was that everyone just looked at her in surprise and fell silent. Yeah, why not? Tekker was the first to agree with his daughter. What did it mean again? Tower of Home? Or Earth? Link asked, pondering. Tower of Home, everyone kept mumbling it back and forth. Seth also liked the name, otherwise he would not have chosen it for their base. Minasmar it is then. Any objections? He asked in the room. Nobody had any objection. It was the first name all of them could appreciate. In the end, it was Ruby, the little girl, who got her will. When everyone accepted this name, a soft light engulfed them and Minasmar was added to their affiliation. We will talk with the princess. I bet we can have the Empire recognize our guild in no time. They didn't talk much about their future plans that night. They used the time to bond and have fun. But it was inevitable that the topic would fall onto what had happened earlier. Finn and the others were shocked when Seth told them what the Willis family had done. In this night there was something else that was decided unanimously besides the name. The Willis family was their enemy. Sooner or later they would have to get rid of those ruthless people. There was no will to coexist with such scum at this point. But they were strong. Not just level-wise. They had numbers. The family's core members were all mages or other caster classes, but they each had their own parties and troops to grind the dungeons. On top of that, they had money and political power in Delta. They could not just smash them, as Seth did in the Weasel Den. They would need more strength to uproot them. In the end, his meant that the Earth team needed to grind levels, while Seth would have to prepare better equipment for Mina and the others. A lot of their equipment was still the items he had made for them in Aura. Seth was actually happy to think about the future work. It was not just that he felt safe in Minasmar, but he also felt peaceful. Right now, he was where he wanted to be. He could concentrate on what he wanted to make and had access to the auction house to get the materials he needed. On top of that, they were in a mountain range and his base was a subterranean tower. What better place to start a mine and go treasure hunting? Tunneling like a termite through the bowels of Earth had a very own charm. Maybe he had absorbed too much of the dwarven nature. How about we all go and have a look at our new home? Seth suggested when it became late, and everyone had become a little tipsy. Aren't you a bit too cocky? Calling our family's heritage your home, the young master suddenly blocked their way. It was the intelligent-looking youngster from the Willis family who had picked a fight with him before. Oh hey. What was your name again? Gerald. Seth asked with a smirk. It's Harold. Harlot, the tipsy link suddenly called out and examined the young master. What a fitting name. Enough. Get them. From behind Harold a bunch of adventurers stepped out of the darkness. She was not polite and used observe on the newcomers. They were all somewhere between leave 50 and leave 60. They most likely had a secondary job, and their equipment was a mix of uncommon and rare items. Finn cast a spell, and everyone was instantly sober and equipped their gear. Seth's party had the lowest level but clad in epic gear they were the best equipped. Yulkat's fur had the highest level on average and their equipment was comparable to that of the attackers. They had exchanged some of the pieces he had given them for better ones, but many were still those Seth had gifted them. They took Mary, Jane, Ruby, and the casters into their midst and the vanguards hurriedly formed a circle. Jonah, Monique, Tecker, Seth, Finn, and Mike went forward to meet the attackers head-on. May have thought they could overpower them as long as they matched their numbers, but they had tremendously overestimated themselves. Dragon might, before the two parties could clash, the Willis forces suddenly slowed down when the debuff hit them. Beside Dragon might they were also hit by the effect of the Dark Knight armor. It was true that people with secondary classes had an advantage, and it was trickier to fight human enemies. But they could not be compared to beasts like ice trolls. They were showered in negative status effects that easily got rid of the advantage they originally had. While they stopped the vanguard, Mina zipped past them and got rid of casters. None of them were prepared for a high-level assassin that ported through shadows. Mina offed everyone except the young master. Those of the vanguard still standing hurried to give up. With how easy the fight ended, Seth and the other couldn't help but think that it was Harold acting on his own and not the vampire's schemes. Going further, Valen could have sacrificed this guy to collect more information on us. Everyone nodded. Thinking of what they did to Lydia, it was quite possible for that old vampire to sacrifice this failure to get some info on them. Let's get back to the church. What about him? Mina asked and pointed at the tied-up Harold. Let's ask Simon to imprison him at the church. I don't want that in our base. After all, he had attacked members of the church. Lay members, but still members. They walked to the church, left Harold with Simon, and they finally teleport to Mina's march. Chapter 242. Exploring home. The party arrived in the impressive entrance hall of the tower, provoking many OHS and AHS from the first-timers. Finn acted just like the caravan children by flying around and looking at everything. Mina's and Lixus's eyes glittered seeing the exquisite decorations and materials. Welcome to Mina's Mar. Seth said happily. Seeing everyone coming together lifted his mood after what had just happened. They would have to deal with the Willises sooner or later, but now was not the time for that. Everyone walked around the tower together and explored the rooms and facilities. Even those his party that had stayed in the tower until now were surprised about the expanse and extent of the tower. Even Seth entered some of these rooms for the first time. The lower floors had a separate guardhouse, many storage rooms, alchemy and enchantment facilities, gardens, a giant library, the magic junction room, a huge kitchen, and a cafeteria. There were a lot more rooms for the daily functions of the tower. A smithy was missing, but Seth didn't need one other than his own. The upper floors were servant rooms, guest rooms, dining rooms, anything needed for a life in luxury. Enough space to cater to hundreds of people. Also, higher quality versions of some of the facilities are on the lower levels. And in the highest floors were the control room and the private quarters of the tower master. In the end, the tower was not just meant to be a means to prolong the life of Tom Willis. After everyone took a thorough look at everything, this was a place to train magicians. Like a school of magic. No wonder especially Valen was this pissed about them circumventing their family. Had they gotten their hands on this place, they could have trained a private force of casters and crafters. Now it all belonged to them. The only question was whether they wanted to build their own force. Seth. This place is really great. Finn finally managed to pull away from everything else and talk to him under heavy breaths. She was really pumped about the new place. He also explained the defensive systems of the tower when they came to the control room. Everyone was registered as a residence with basic control rights allowing them to circumvent the defense systems and teleport around the tower. Now, they only needed a kind of token for the tower to recognize them when they wanted to return from the city. Seth already had an idea for that. Can we choose rooms? Lixus asked excitedly. Of course. Evie went along with Yulkat's fur and helped them choose rooms while everyone else returned to theirs. Everyone was tired and wanted to sleep. Only Mina sneakily stayed behind. Can't you show me your room? She flirted with him, and they vanished into his private quarters. The diplomatic delegation had their day off tomorrow, so they all stayed in the tower. They shared a breakfast cooked by Link, and Seth saw with joy that everyone got along well, even without alcohol. Jonah had changed and now constantly wore the mask Seth had made for him, instead of the stuffy outfit he had used before. Today Seth would make the items for everyone that would allow them to leave and enter the tower from the city. The others were left to their own devices. Some started wandering around and exploring the tower, while those like Mike, Jonah, and Monique occupied one of the training rooms to compare notes. Allison and Evie had fallen into old habits and started conquering the alchemy wing. Seth was in his private quarters. He had established his workshop in one of the bigger rooms. The plan was simple: sigil rings. 13 rings for the founding members of Mina's March. Seth did not think long about the crest. A simplified tower below a stylized arch to symbolize the earth, but also the protection of a home. For the rings, he decided to use some of the arcane gold. The big advantage of this material was that it automatically absorbed and stored mana from the surrounding. This meant there was no need to implement a core and enchantments to collect the mana. It also means he would not need to infuse a soul. Why was this important? Normally it was hard to wear more than 2 rings on each hand because the magic and enchantments of the items could interfere with each other. But the natural ability arcane gold did not. Another reason why it was so valuable. As long as Seth only enchanted it with a circuit to emit a signature for the tower and size adjustment, the ring could be worn as a 3rd ring without a problem, no matter what other rings they had. These rings were not just a tool, but would also signal their affiliation with Mina's March. People could recognize the crest, and if they were capable of even recognize the material. Using something like arcane gold on a sigil ring was extravagant and imposing. The first step was the most important. Seth forged the rings with the demonic ballad for soul binding. This way nobody could use them to gain access even if they managed to steal one from the party. Sigil Ring of Mina's Mar. Epic. Durability, 1500. 1 auto size adjustment. 2 access signal. 3 plus 250 mana. 4 soulbound. A ring created by Journeyman Smith using extremely precious materials. The ring grants access to the Tower of Mina's Mar and is given to a founding member. Despite them being relatively simple and Seth using the weaker rare arcane gold, the rings turned out epic. His goldsmith and enchantment rose by a few %. He didn't stop there. He went a step further. Using the dwarven copper that had been lying in his inventory for weeks, he made another batch of rings. Using 5 billion Argentine pesos of copper, he made 40 copper rings with the crest of Mina's March. He infused each of the rings with a small soul armament. He gave a signature function to make them unforgeable. He had some help from Al to come up with this function. What it did was relatively simple. When 2 of these rings came close to each other or one of the sigil rings, they would glow for a moment to recognize their authenticity. Ring of Mina's Mar. Uncommon. Durability, 400. 1 auto size adjustment. 2 recognition. 3 soulbound. A ring created by Journeyman Smith. The ring shows allegiance to Mina's Mar and grants guests access to the tower. Given only to friends of Mina's March. Seth made these rings with the future in mind. If they really became big, they needed a way to recognize allies. The world was big, but at least it would be very hard to fake the recognition function, that was based on the invisible infused soul. Some of these rings were meant for the Tijat. Even if they were not going to join him, he wanted to give them something to show their friendship. He also made some more for future allies. They were not just a way to recognize allies, but also a promise. Mina's Mar would help the wearer of these rings if they ever got into trouble. So even if Drosy and his people left, if at some point, they needed help, they could use the rings to identify themselves. The last things he made using another 5 billion Argentine pesos of dwarven copper were visitor tokens. These could be given to people they worked with. He didn't do anything special to the tokens, as they worked by being recognized by the tower, once they got into range. All they did was grant passage past the traps at the entrance up to the bridge. And further access would only be given after an inspection. He made 25 of these tokens. He guessed that would be a good stock to have for the time being. When Seth started looking for the others, he found that Finn, Bulko, Tekker, and the girls were busy furnishing an assembly room. It was a big round table with 14 seats. 1 for the tower master and 13 for the founding members. He could only smile. Even if he missed some details, his friends had thought of them. He asked the tower to notify the members to assemble in their new meeting room. One by one they appeared around the table after agreeing to be ported here. Some still wore armor from sparring or had stains from alchemy on their clothes. The most unique was probably Lixis, wearing a bathrobe and a towel tied around her head. The half-elf saw their gazes and huffed. What? I found a big bath area and treated myself to one. It's a burden to only wash up using life magic. Everyone nodded understandingly. Some also planned to visit the bath later that day. They all sat down and looked at Seth, who had called them here. I called you to distribute something. It will also make the founding of Minas Mar official. At least among us. He took the jewelry box with the 13 rings and opened it for them to see. Take one each and pass on the box. Once everyone had their ring, he explained the function of the rings. When the empty box returned to his hands, he looked at the round of smiles. Even Bulko smiled at the precious golden ring he wore on his pinky. As the Tower Master and in attendance with the 13 founding members, I declare the official establishment of Minas Mar. He left a question mark at the end to see if anyone wanted to jump off at the last minute, but was only greeted by cheers. Who didn't dream of being a high-ranking member of their own organization? Only Finn the little fairy joined in half-heartedly. She seemed a little grumpy. Finn, is there something wrong? Seth asked her. HNGG. No, and yes. Being a founding member is good and all, but it doesn't sound imposing at all. Finn wants a better title. Seth is Tower Master, that one's cool. Finn also wants something cooler than Founder. Everyone was stumped for a moment and started pondering. She was right. A founder was something high and mighty in a corporation, but in the Empire? Seth could only sigh. Then what is your suggestion what we should be called? He asked Finn. He was sure she already had an idea. The Tower Master and the 13 Lords of Minas Mar, they immediately exclaimed. A lord was definitely more imposing than a founder. Everyone nodded. Some other suggestions were made by the others, but the 13 lords stuck with them. From this point forth they would go by the Tower Master and the 13 Lords of Minas March. Chapter 243. Energy of Friendship. They had a name, a crest, titles, and sigil rings. They took a moment to talk about the other rings Seth made, but most people wanted to get to what they had been doing. Seth didn't stop them and soon the 13 lords had dispersed again. Aside from Mina and Finn, Mary and Jane stayed back instead of leaving with Tekker. At some point their unofficial job had become babysitting Ruby and they hung around the father and daughter a lot. We would like to talk with you about something. Jane stepped forward and spoke for them. They looked determined. Seth had wanted to visit the church with Finn and Mina but asked them to wait. What can I help you with? Seth asked curiously. He felt a little bad that he had not really taken much time to interact with the two after they arrived in Y City. We want to make ourselves useful, too, the shy Mary broke out. We know that we can't really help with the fight, so we would like to become non-combat personnel, Jane explained. So, what's your plan? We want to change our class. I wish to become a merchant and Mary can become a scribe. I could take care of the shop and Mary could be like your assistant, she fumbled a little, but their plan seemed solid. Seth thought about their suggestion. The more he thought about it, the more he understood her point. He was a blacksmith and really didn't want to take care of managing a shop or the guild. People to take care of the administrative staff were needed. The girls were right, they had no talent for fighting. But did they have one for the administrative work? Even if they had no great talent, grooming someone you already trust was easier than finding a stranger to trust. In the best case, Drosy and his people could help them at the start. Seth kept nodding as he thought about it. Yes, I think that is a good idea. Do you think you are up for this task? Actually, before everything went to shit, I was studying economy. I think I can handle managing a shop. Jane said more or less confidently. I was a secretary before, Mary commented in a small voice. Her outbreak before had probably used up all her courage. This explained how they got the idea to rather take up administrative roles. Couldn't you do that without changing your class? Seth asked concerned. Completely changing one's class was possible, but it had a price. It was different from evolving one's class. One would lose half their levels and proficiency in their current class skills. Class skills would also be degraded to secondary skills or completely lost. The price was not worth mentioning early on, but the girls were already close to level 30. I think the skills of a merchant will be needed for future business. It will make a lot of things easier. Jane asserted. Mary nodded behind her. All right then. We just wanted to leave for the church. You can come along. The 5 people left in the room teleported to the reception hall of the church. While Mina, Seth, and Finn would go together to meet the Empire's official in charge of energy. After leaving the reception, the girls split off and asked a clerk how to change their class. Seth's group found Simon and left the church from the back door. They brought out the cloaks to hide their appearance. Now that the Willis family was onto them, they needed to be a little more careful. Their destination was the administration office of Delta. It was a giant office building that Delta now shared with the Empire. Before the apocalypse, it was the coalition building where representatives of all districts would work. Of course, now that contact was lost to most districts on the continents, it had lost its original function. There were still representatives of Beta and Y City, but the cooperation was long since lost as their opinions in working with the Empire differed too much. All officials of Delta had their office in this building. Mike had told them that the princess had already arranged an appointment with the 2 officials. The maze-like structure of the office building cost them almost 30 minutes to find the Empire's official. Fortunately, they had set off early enough. They came before a strict-looking secretary who sent them through after taking their names. "Ah, you must be Mr. Smith, right? The princess already informed me about the rough situation. I'm Archbold, the energy minister of Delta Province." They were greeted by a well-dressed middle-aged man. He was white-kempt back hair and a groomed white mustache. A golden monocle sparkled in his eye. He put down the paper he was reading and shook their hands one by one before asking them to sit. In the corner stood another person. He was a young man with tan skin and dark brown hair. His hazel eyes gave him a warm and friendly aura. He wore a beige overall and a flat cap. "This is Louis. I invited him since the princess told me that you might need help with the energy conversion. He's one of our best hex engineers and should be able to help and install a converter for energy harvesting. I think he can explain it better than me." It followed a lengthy talk where they explained the situation to Louis, who seemed fascinated by the ancient technology. They also explained how the energy infrastructure with magic worked. Unlike electricity, magic could not simply be transferred through a network of cables. Power lines like that would need extremely rare and precious materials. Instead, it worked using an energy formation in each individual building. Other formations and devices could be connected to it and pull the needed energy through this connection. Mana crystals were needed to supply these energy formations with power. Mana crystals were literally crystallized mana. These crystals could be found and mined in places of power. But those deposits were rare, and the method was outdated. Although natural crystals were stronger, they could deal permanent damage to the mana cycle if they were mined excessively. The modern method was the mentioned converters. They could be installed in areas with rich mana and artificially condense a mana crystal. It was like creating a mana battery. Louis would only need to install a converter in the tower and Minasmar could start selling artificial mana crystals to the Ministry of Energy. At Seth's answer, Archbold explained that the private trade of mana crystals was illegal. On one hand, it was to discourage the illegal mining of mana crystals. On the other hand, these crystals were energy sources. Unregulated distribution could lead to accidents. The worst that could happen was that they were used for nefarious means or to power horrible spells or formations. The converters would count the number of produced mana crystals and a hex engineer would need to check these numbers in regular intervals. By comparing the crystals delivered and those produced, they could make sure that none were unaccounted for. Seth didn't mind. He had no plans to become an illegal crystal dealer. But they understood that that might have been the plan of the Willis family. They could have kept the tower a secret, build up an army and pay for resources with illegal mana crystal trade. Since they probably had Earth as official in their pocket and their ancestors' knowledge, they would have been able to pull it off. Even with Seth in charge of the tower, they probably thought of slowly but surely gaining a foot in the tower by paying him off. Seth shared what happened and his suspicion with Archbold. Why didn't he suspect the Empire's man? This was the first and strongest foothold of the Krana Empire. They would not send the kind of incompetent personnel that would be bribed by the natives. And the princess obviously trusted him with his job. "If you feel better this way, I will deal with sheikhs on my side. You don't have to go meet him. I will also get the papers and license ready. In the meantime, you could go with Louis and take a look at the converters." There was another reason why he went along with Archbold and Louis' suggestions. He had the handy pocket lich. The hex engineer would not be able to install anything harmful with Alzalsa watching. Louis took the lead and he led them into the belly of the beast. Every department had ample storage space in the concrete basement of the coalition building. There was also the hex engineer workshop and the storage room that stored ready-built converters. The man brought one of them out and showed the party the different functions of the device and how it worked. Mina and Finn were bored. Seth was slightly interested. It was mostly the great sorceress that listened attentively to the explanations. Lewis was the kind of man who ignored the audience's reaction when he explained something. He just kept talking and lost himself in explaining everything. When he finally stopped, even the Lich was happy that he stopped. They set a date for the installation and left in a hurry. Chapter 244. Growing Family. After Lewis' explanation, they felt more tired than after a dungeon dive. Even the energetic fairy brute only sat on his shoulders with empty eyes. Let's return to Minas Mar, I had enough for today. Said and done. They returned to the church and found that Mary and Jane had already returned to the tower. Back inside Seth's private quarters, they fell into his bed and had a little nap. The nap was followed by a meal at the cafeteria. They found all the other members having their dinner and used the chance to brief them on the energy business. Especially Mary and Jane, as they wanted to become the administrative body of Minas March. Master. The guest in the medical wing has awoken. During the meal, the tower suddenly informed him that Lydia had woken up. He quickened his pace and soon finished up before leaving for the med bay. He appeared at Lydia's bedside but only got a tired reaction from her. Even with the facilities of the tower, her scars had taken a dark purple color and looked painful just to look at. This kind of curse was a lot easier to cast than to purify. Lydia's eyes looked up to him, but it took a while for her to recognize him. Seth, she asked with a weak raspy voice. Hey, how are you feeling? As if someone threw me in a blender. A surprisingly accurate description of the state I found you in. What exactly happened between you and your family? It took a while for her to narrate what had happened in between resting and hushed parts of sentences. In the end, it was roughly as they had expected. Her family had shadowed them and saw that she got along quite well. They wanted her to use this and gain access to the tower. They had all the plans of the tower. As long as they got someone in with administrative rights, there was a chance to remove the tower master's authority. She denied them. Unlike Seth and the others, the family had never gifted her anything. She was the disliked, talentless child everyone was ashamed of. Unlike the stupid little kids in stories, that did dumb stuff in an attempt to gain the recognition of her horrible family. She saw no reason to lift a finger to help them. On the contrary. She didn't mention it like that, but it turned into a fight when Valen tried to take her to the room. She didn't wish to speak of this room, but there was an existential horror in her eyes when she mentioned the room. Lydia only mentioned that there were many unspeakable things in the Willis building, but the room was the worst. She struck before they could apprehend her, and it escalated into a chaotic fight. It all ended with her being tortured. Seth had arrived when Valen went to wash up before bringing her to the room. Listening to her, not ending up in that room, was worth having half her body covered in cursed scars. Seth sat at her bed silently and waited for her to speak. I have nowhere to go anymore. Her voice broke and tears flowed from her eyes. Seth grasped her hand. What are you saying? You can stay here. Don't think you only lost something that day. You are one of us now. He patted her head and held her hand until she calmed down. Her eyes became heavy and Seth saw that she was falling asleep. He leaned forward and some of his mana decreased when he whispered in her ear. Don't worry. We will be a better family for you. She had fallen asleep. Seth didn't know whether she heard his last words and hurriedly left since he now felt embarrassed for saying such a cheesy line. When Lydia woke up the next time, she found a small copper ring with a tower below a stylized arch at her bedside. Seth found Drosy in his quarters. He could see the Tija packing their things. Are you leaving? Oh, Seth, it's you. Yes, we are getting ready to leave. We wanted to leave tomorrow morning. I would have visited you later to inform you. And what we talked about. I'm sorry, but we are a merchant caravan after all. This is a completely new world, and we wish to explore it before deciding whether we stay or leave again, the old cat answered apologetically but determinedly. Seth nodded understandingly. I understand and I hope you find great fortune on these travels. Take these before you leave. Seth brought out a small chest with 24 copper rings, one for each member of the caravan. Take these as a symbol of friendship. With these, you will always be a guest in this tower. I hope to expand Minas Mar in the future. If any of you ever needs help, just look for us. Even if that person may not know you, the ring will be proof of identity. The rings were only uncommon, so Drosy easily saw the use of this kind of token. He appreciated the gesture and accepted the present with a smile. I will offer the same to you. If you or your people ever need help, we will do what we can to help. Thank you. Seth nodded and turned around to leave. It was a shame that he could not recruit them, but it didn't mean that they would not join him in the future. Or become his business partners. He didn't mind either. Ah, there is one more thing. Drosy, are you interested in getting back at the Willis family? The elder ears stood up in attention. Seth could not help but smile. In the end, cats were prideful creatures. Would they just accept having someone step on their pride? I'm listening. Follow me, we will talk through the plan with the rest of the team. If you like it, you can join. He assembled the lords and told them what had happened to Lydia and what she told him. Everyone was appalled, especially Drosy had his fur stand in the air from agitation. They attacked us last night, probably to gauge our strength. I don't like the idea of waiting for the evil mastermind to complete his preparations and only react to what is about to come. Let's strike first. He explained his plan to the lords and Drosy. The latter pondered for a moment before answering. I'm in. With Drosy and the guardians of the caravan joining their plan, they had a lot more leeway in case the enemy turned out stronger than expected. The enemy leader could rival Alzalsa in age after all. There was nothing wrong with being careful. When the night fell in the city of Delta they moved out. Drosy, 5 of the guardians, and a mage joined the lord in their assault. Only Mary and Jane stayed back to take care of Ruby. The assault party left Minas Mar through the teleport to the church. Seth on the other hand took the elevator. At his side was Felix, Evie's familiar. When he reached the secret entrance, he stopped the door from opening and waited for his chance. Chapter 245. Willis and T. Valen sat in the penthouse apartment of the Willis building. He was having a great night so far. On his bed laid some stupid girl who had come to the city to make it big as an adventurer. How easy it was to harvest such young blood with just some money. First, he could satisfy his carnal desires and then his hunger. Valen loved this day and age. It had become a lot easier to get his hands on fresh blood. Back then there would have been a lot of people asking questions even when just some homeless vanished off the streets. It would take a lot of resources to make records vanish. Now? Nobody cared about 1 or 2 adventurers disappearing. Surveillance had become almost zero and the police forces and guards already reached their limit taking care of the obvious crimes. An ancient vampire like him had an easy time making a living. The only break in his heart was that someone else had gotten his hand on his grandfather's creation. If only the family was not so incompetent. Grandfather Tom had left so much behind for them in this building, that only needed the tower to be activated. What empire? What demons? They could have taken control of Delta in the blink of an eye if one of their descendants had proven worthy. They had even gotten one of the entrance tokens into circulation to see whether somebody managed to get in the tower. It would not have been hard to get control back, once they were in. But what happened? Some upstart had gotten lucky and stolen their key to glory. The vampire was still stumped about how that could have happened. The worst part was that this Seth was too smart for his own good. Although he had turned out stronger than expected, there was no way for some random guy to compete with them. Even if they could not get their hand on the tower, they could not allow someone else to. It was better to just get rid of him. A warm feeling filled his stomach when he thought of what he was going to do with this Seth and his friends. There were quite a few cute girls among his entourage. The thought of defiling and breaking them in front of that smug guy's eyes satisfied his sadistic heart. And afterward, he would bring them into the room. He could not wait to see his face once he saw those girls follow him willingly. Swirling the fresh blood in his wine glass, he stepped onto the balcony and took a sip. The bathrobe that covered his chiseled body blew in the soft breeze of the city. The schemer's self-satisfied smile vanished when he heard an explosion from the lower floors. Fire and wind magic struck the front of the building. The magic protections were able to block most of the damages, but the glass facade was still smashed to pieces. The guards stationed in the lobby rushed out to meet the attackers but were met by overwhelming force. The Willis forces could barely hold on against the attacker while the enemy casters were already firing the second volley. The protections had a hard time withstanding the elemental attacks but held on. It was a concentrated beam of light that finally broke through. Part of the protective layers on the lower floors dissipated, giving way for the magic attacks. But this chance was gone. The guards and protection had bought enough time for the Willis private parties to join the fray. They were the family members accompanied by their personal high-level parties. They easily outnumbered the attackers 3:1 but still had to exert themselves to bind their attacks. Valen had not cared originally. The family had not only friends. Being attacked by others was nothing unusual. But seeing that their private forces were needed to deal with the threat, he came over to the railing and watched. He looked at the fight down on the street. It would have been hard for a regular human, but his vampire eyes were like those of an eagle. He immediately recognized the people that had originally accompanied that upstart. They were even accompanied by a force of feral cat warriors. But where was that annoyance? He could not find their leader among them. If he was not among them, had he entered alone through the elevator? It couldn't be that he planned to fight him alone. The vampire couldn't help but snicker. Admittedly, the man's armor was sturdy and his gear high grade, but that was far from enough to stand up to him. What else could be that man's goal with this little charade? Valen observed the enemy being pushed back and returned to his apartment to get dressed. If Seth was in the building, he would find him and kill him. The vampire saw it as a great chance. The leader had left the circle of his guard and entered the battlefield alone. The bloodsucker took his private elevator to the ground floor. His prey would come from the lobby, it would be easier to start from there and work his way up. On the way down, Valen felt a little stuffy. Was it getting warmer? The moment Valen left the elevator and entered the lobby, Seth left the regular elevator on the floor right below the penthouse. Throwing balls of soul fire left and right, he kept looking for the stairwell to the penthouse. When he finally found his way up, he only found a dead girl on a bed, but no one else. Valen, he called out for the vampire, but it seemed like a bloodsucker was out. Originally, Seth had wanted to taunt him a little before using home call to return to the church. Today was not the day for the vampire to die, as Alsa was still on cooldown. Otherwise, he would have thrown the lich at the vampire and let the two old-timers duke it out. Since nobody was home to receive guests, Seth started setting fire to the place. He had already done so to the first 10 floors of the building. There was little that could stop the soul fire from devouring everything. Especially since he was still present to kept it going. He used the stairwell down and meticulously threw several fireballs and fire lances into each floor. The building may have had a shield on the outside, but the inside burned like tinder. At this point, the fire he had lit on the lower floor would have spread to the mid of the high-riser. He got not kill notification at all. Was the whole building empty? Or were all residents above leave 40 and simply ported out? Seth had just lit the 20th floor from the top when he heard a wrathful roar shaking the building. As he was listening, the volume of the roar became louder and the shaking stronger. It seemed like a very angry bat was closing in on him. He heard a crash followed by the sound of ripping metal and shattering concrete. Accompanied by the elevator door that was launched into the hallway, a still burning Valen entered the stage. The ugly giant bat that would even make a gargoyle look away in disgust was covered in burns and still burning patches of soul fire. The eyes of the creature looked wild and crazy from rage and pain. Swinging its giant claws and thick muscular arms, it charged at Seth like a bull. The blacksmith used the disruptor boots to disrupt the charge, and lame ones walked to evade the brainless charge. Hey, did you lose your sanity? Taunting a brainless beast won't be fun at all. The only answer was an ear-shattering roar and a fast combo of claw swipes. Although the speed and power were impressive, there was no technique or skill used in these swings. Just rage. This old beast couldn't have fallen in a fit of rage, just because he set fire to his place, right? This had to be a feint to draw him into a fight. But what if it wasn't? Seth decided to throw a lance of soul fire at the vampire. He could see the beast hesitate for just a moment before almost evading and taking the hit. The lance penetrated its shoulder and exploded. The explosion collapsed the whole section of the corridor and filled it with a thick dust cloud. A huge dust cloud with a potentially dead and scheming monster inside. What to do? Seth ran away from the cloud, as far as he could, and reached the other end of the hallway where it ended in a huge window. He equipped Mind Decay and took aim at the dust cloud. If this guy wanted to take some hits to bait him into a fight, he would make sure they were hits that hurt. At this point, he needed to use his resources economically. He still needed his mana and mental energy. God damn it! What is this fire? Finally the hulking figure of Valen came into view. It seemed like he had given up his act when he saw that Seth was not falling for it. The shoulder was completely missing and the arm was only hanging on by a strip of meat. The wound was still burning and the healing factor of the vampire had a hard time offsetting the fire. This time Seth was not up for a conversation. An arrow shot from Mind Decay was lodged into the vampire's chest before he even finished his question. He screamed in pain for the first time. Wah! Another almost penetrated the left eyes, but Valen was able to evade in the last moment. It only brushed his ear before vanishing into dust behind him. I see you. The third was barely blocked by an opaque blood shield. The vicious arrow had been aiming straight for the vampire's crotch. Bastard, he evaded another arrow, but at this time the effects of the first arrow became obvious. Spreading from where the shaft stuck out from the chest, a dark patch of necrotic flesh was expanding. You know, I didn't actually plan to kill you today, Thunk, but maybe I actually have a chance. Seth kept shooting at the giant bat while talking. Grr, he evaded the arrows and kept closing in on Seth. Yes, think you can take me down. I just need you to stay and not run away, Valen thought to himself. Once he was in range, he could kill Seth with his blood magic in one hit. Another arrow came flying. Valen came another step closer. Just a little more. Just a little. A giant hand suddenly broke through the wall to the right of Valen and grasped the bat's ugly head. Instinctively the vampire slashed at the arm with his claws, but they could only slide across the surface of the iron-hard muscles. Next, an upper body and a terrifying three-faced dog head came into view as Cerberus leaned forward and the rest of him broke through the wall. Its red eyes were focused on the vampire as it lifted the creature off its feet. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the three-headed hellhound behind it. Seth had wanted to get closer to capture the vampire's soul, but Al warned him. I told you not to get close to it. It can still cast the blood magic even in this situation. Seth grimaced. What could he do? He really wanted the vampire's soul and there was no guarantee it would drop its soul voluntarily. But then it struck him. Cerberus could use the same skills as him. He had only thought of the crafting skill until now. Cerberus, keep beating it until you can use soul capture. I want that soul. Valen's eyes widened in horror as the second fist started mincing his body. Chapter 246. Morning Mood. What was left of Valen after Cerberus was done with him had hardly any resemblance with a living being. This was how far they had to go to bring it close enough to death. Vampire really had a scary vitality. The fire from below had now reached where he had fought Valen. Seth had no idea what other useful thing there could be on these minced remains and decided to use the system option to harvest them. He got one vampire fang and a claw. And a grey powder he could not identify. Not much. In exchange, the vampire gave an extraordinary amount of experience despite Seth harvesting the soul. His level was already close to leveling up to level 44 but was now already 35% of the way to level 45. He got 9 AP and used them to bring his int to 60. On the way down his pyrokinesis leveled up and became level 5. He used the ability to put out the fires on every floor he came past. This was why he saved his mental energy in his fight with Valen. If he left the fire alone it would probably spread and devour part of the city. He wanted to make this place his home. It was not very nice to burn down a place when you just moved in. This was also enough. The building was completely burned out, making it unusable. He didn't need to completely burn it down. There was only one room that was almost untouched by the wild flames. The door had damages but looked almost pristine compared to the surroundings. This thing had strong magic defenses. Someone put a lot of time and thought into this. Al commented on the strange room. Seth pushed the door expecting it not to budge, but it slowly swung open. The defenses were probably exhausted. The door had swung open and revealed a dark room with a chair in the middle. A smell wafted out of the room, and it reeked similar to ozone, but it made Seth feel perturbed. The black walls of the room were covered in all kinds of runes and formations. The Lich's reaction the moment this came into view didn't help alleviate Seth's worries. Was this the room? The sorceress seemed to have read his thoughts and answered. From what I can garner, this is a place to break down and resemble someone's mind. It's the step above brainwashing. The user can literally mold the victim's memories, thoughts, and even personality. It's just disgusting. You. Seth summoned the furnace. Normal soul fire seemed to not be enough, so he would bring the heat. There was no way he would leave this thing here. The jet flame of the furnace shot into the room. The ordinary stool was vaporized in an instant, but the room itself resisted. A thin layer of magic covered the formations and stubbornly resisted. Seth could not help but crank up the heat. The protective membrane only slowly started showing signs of damage. Despite the various power UPS, he felt his mental energy decreasing at a terrifying speed as he ramped the power to the highest degree. But he fully concentrated on the slowly melting defenses. His eyes were focused on the bright flame and his mind on controlling this terrifying power. At some point, only the fire was on his mind. All there was fire, and the goal he wanted to reach. Ding! Your skill Fire Affinity Leave 7 had become Fire Affinity LV.8. And suddenly the flame broke through the defensive membrane. With increasing momentum, it destroyed the defenses and started devouring the formations below. Once there was a crack, it was over. In just a moment the soul fire had spread and destroyed this architectural abomination. Seth was happy about the improvement, but the exhaustion dampened his joy. There were still a few floors he needed to extinguish before he could leave. When he finally reached the lobby, he used home call and returned to the church, and then directly to his bed in the tower. He should have checked up on his comrades. That was what a really good leader would do, even when he was tired. Seth never claimed to be a really good leader, so he was fast asleep. He was woken by the tower's notification. Master. The members wish for your presence. Tell them to wait. They insist. Me. He rolled off his bed and sluggishly propped himself up. He wore some casual comfortable clothes. The after effects of overusing mental energy led to a serious lack of motivation. Or maybe it was just Seth's morning mood. Okay, I'm ready. You aren't wearing any pants. He was ported just after Al's remark. The seats around the round table were all filled and only he was missing. Nobody was missing and there was an additional chair for Drosy. There were some weird looks, but Seth played it off as nothing and simply sat down on his seat. If he didn't acknowledge that he had come in underwear, the others could not say anything. It might have worked if not for one person in the room. Wow! Did Seth manage to make invisible trousers? Can Finn have some, too? She didn't mean to do any harm, but everyone on the table was holding back a chuckle. Seth sighed. Just a second. He returned to his quarters and got some pants before he returned again. Let's start. How did it go on your side yesterday? You are all here, so I guess nobody died. Actually. Mike said a little embarrassedly. He was the leader as he had experience with it. I died. It was awesome. I had spent most of my mana and became a super strong death claw. Evie exclaimed ecstatically. Who would have thought he would ever see someone so pumped about dying? She made a real massacre. Monique commented and gave Evie a weird side glance. The girl had turned into a really terrifying undead if one wanted to call it that. It was more of a demon, the ugly monstrous kind. Her claws had split the enemies and the corpses fouled away in a matter of minutes. They fled after killing about half the enemies when they saw the fire light up the building. They were supposed to be a diversion, not an execution commando. How was it on your side? Finally came the inevitable question and Seth narrated what happened on his side. You did what? Mina jumped up in worry when he came to the fight with Valen. But Seth looked fine, so she reined in her feelings and sat back down again. But it didn't take long. You killed their leader, this time it was Mike reacting. As the deputy leader of the party, they had come up with the plan together. Originally, they just wanted to burn the Willis building to take away their main base of operations. The party would get their attention and Seth would set the building aflame before everyone would run off. Once Alsace's cooldown was off they could have sent her to end him in silence. Hey, don't blame me, okay? I was there, already at the store. The milk was on sale. So, I picked up some on the way back. What? Mike was slightly confused. He wanted to fight, and I entertained him. I saw a chance and took care of him. Not every 200-year-old is a beast is like Al. Some end up as pickings on the way. Don't compare me to that thing. It's not a question of age. I could have gotten rid of that guy in my teens. Everyone looked at him weirdly. Even if Valen was not as strong as they had expected. He was still an old vampire. Most of them had at least some experience with vampires. Especially Jonah with his class. Vampires were strong, especially for humanoids. And they had a similar mind to a human. And Valen had to be at least an Ori vampire. It was nothing the Seth they knew could really fight one-on-one. They realized that Seth had some trump cards even they could not predict. When he explained what exactly happened everyone gained a new respect for the creepy golem that was normally silently working in the back when Seth was smithing something. The most surprised was Drosy who had just listened silently and had gotten a glimpse of Seth's power for the first time. Let's get to the most important question. Did it drop something good? Finn couldn't hold back. Chapter 247. Farewell. Seth did not have the chance yet, to check his loot. He brought out the sharp tooth and very long thick fingernail. The fang was okay, but the claw provoked visible disgust from the others, it was not pretty to look at. Old Vampire's Fang, crafting material, epic. The fang of an old Ori vampire who managed to survive for centuries in a world without magic. High compatibility with blood magic and life force. Old Vampire Claw, crafting material, rare. The claw of an old Ori vampire who managed to survive for centuries in a world without magic. High compatibility with blood magic and life force. Not bad, the fang is epic rated. He took a look at Drosy before mentioning the last drop of Valen. I also have his soul. Harvested soul, medium, crafting material, rare. The strong soul of a vampire with a lot of its memories intact. Seth guessed that the vampiric soul would grant or strengthen skills like blood magic or HP regeneration. He was tempted to use it for himself, but it would probably have the greatest synergy with Jonah. The loot was not quite overwhelming for the others, and they deliberated their future actions after the enemy leader was exterminated. The party had made sure to wear disguises when they attacked the building, and everyone who saw Seth was dead. The probability of repercussion from the government was small. They could proceed with the energy deal with the Empire and then start looking for a shop location in the city. The first step was a victory break. To celebrate, they would relax and recover. Cat's would keep an eye on the remnants of the Willis family during their work, but they would probably not have to fear any attack in the next few days. Everyone could go and explore the city at their own leisure. Everyone deserved some time for themselves. It was not much different from how things went usually, except that Seth didn't intend to craft anything at this time. He hoped the others would also take a breather from the grind. Seeing them start crafting technically the moment they arrived made him think that he might have been a bad example. He had grinned his skills like a maniac in order to survive. Now they were safe, there was no need to rush. Seth planned to map out Delta's city center and check out all the shops. And sightseeing. It might seem a little weird to sightsee in the apocalypse, but this was his first time in Delta. He should take a look at the prominent landmarks. He also wanted to see where the demons lived. As the only place where Earth, the Empire, and the demons mixed, it was the only place with institutions unique to the latter two. Lydia had mentioned stuff like the Magic Tower and the Adventurer Academy. He had heard about them in Nemea but never had enough time to visit one. Aura had no such thing, as it was the town of blacksmiths. After the talk, Seth returned to his quarters. He was already awake, so he used the time to ready some materials. The fabrics he had bought from Drosy and the bundle of celestial bronze he got from Puffles found their way into a chest he would send to Nadal the next day. He wrote a letter to the tailor and Tord. He wrote about the things that happened since his departure from Y City. And he also described what he would have liked to be made from the materials. The shirt and pants he wore were still made from ancient bronze and he would have like a set made of the new material. And he wanted a cloak. He couldn't always use the trashy one from the dungeon. He wanted a good one he could wear with his full set. Seth started to sort his other stuff into the tower's vault to free up some inventory space. Uncommon materials, leathers, and boxes with metal bars. Just the more common materials. He prepared them for Cerberus. Just because Seth took a break didn't mean Cerberus couldn't work. A shop needed a range of merchandise. The golem could prepare the blanks for uncommon items like he did before. It also could produce bars and wires for jewelry. Seeing the boxes of weapons and rings and thinking of a shop reminded him of his shop in Aura. The merchandise there might be running out right now, or did it already? He would send some letters to close the shop. For now, it made little sense to keep a shop in another world. He would also visit the system bank to take a look at his finances. It could be done on the way, so it was not much of a hassle. When he asked the tower, he found out that it was early morning outside. It was best to get things over with quickly and enjoy the new day. Before he went to Delta, he visited Lydia at the med bay. When he entered, he found Drosy tending to her wounds. A smile whizzed across his face when he saw both wearing the sigil ring. "Hello, Drosy." "Good morning, Lydia. How is it?" "I feel like shit." "She is doing well," Drosy commented with a smirk. "Did you already tell her?" "No, I don't think it's my place to tell her." With this, the old cat left the two alone in the med bay. When the elder left, Seth talked to Lydia about what had happened. Although she never liked her family, she listened with a slightly sad but composed expression. Tears started flowing when she heard that he had ended up killing Valen and that he had destroyed the room. It was as if a door had opened. Feelings she had held back in ingrained fear broke out and she cried tears of joy. Seth had aired what he had to say. He didn't want to make it more awkward and left. "So, you told her?" Outside the med bay stood Drosy, who had listened in on them. Oh. Yes, it's her family after all. Drosy nodded slowly. Family was still family. Our caravan is ready. We will be leaving soon. I came to say my farewells. You really won't stay? The elder only lightly chuckled and shook his head. He had made his decision. Well, the doors of Minas Mar stay open for you if you ever need a place to stay on Earth. Seth stayed to see the caravan off. They did not leave through the teleportation. While the people of Minas Mar were occupied with dealing with their problems, Drosy took care of the caravan's business in the city. They had all the information they needed and did the business they could in Delta. As such, they left Minas Mar through the main entrance that led over the bridge and through what Seth called the guardhouse. It was the outer building with a bunch of old rooms and workshops where the materials for the tower were originally made. They left Minas Mar on the carts and carriages. It was the start of a new journey for and the end of one for Seth. The kittens and some of the cat people waved back to Seth and the other who saw them off. They watched until the caravan vanished into the tunnel at the end of the bridge. Chapter 248. Victory Break. The next few days went without a hitch. Everyone did as they liked. Seth sent his letters and checked his finances. On their days off he would explore the city with Finn and Mina, otherwise, he would stroll around alone. Delta was different from Y City or Alpha, his hometown. Other districts were a vast megalopolis. As a district built as the seat of government, Delta had a smaller population and a much better structure. It was split into residential districts, governmental districts, business, and shopping districts on several layers that were built into the valley at the flank of one of the central mountains. Similar to Aura, there was a lot of living and working space on layers below the earth. Before Lydia had only shown him the surface, now he had the time to explore the underground. In this era, money was made with merchandise from system classes and the shopping district mirrored this. Seth felt nostalgic thinking of Aura. Just that everything was super modern with electric lights and escalators. Above earth or below didn't matter here. If anything, the stores below were even more exuberant than those above. Of course, there was not everything great. Several layers below were the cheaper and more shady stores. The level of merchandise was slightly lower than Aura but had a greater variety. There were just not as many rare items as there were in Aura. In Aura, the shops of blacksmiths were prominent. As such, weapons and armor were a common sight. Here in Delta, it was a healthy mix of armor, normal-looking clothes, and fantastical-looking clothes ranging from common to rare. There was also a type of clothes he had seen in Y City and was glad there were not more. Superhero suits. And to his dismay, they seemed to be the hype in Delta. Modern textile knowledge and magical materials had created skin-tight supersuits. How had this happened? A dream started crumbling. His beliefs were shaken. There were very few of these in Y City, but many shops here offered only these. They even seemed popular. What would happen to those great battles and wars between knights and mages, or the epic raids on boss monsters if people in colorful spandex anises appeared among them? How was it appropriate to conquer a dungeon looking like Super Brute and the League of Righteousness? Seth knew that these were just his personal preferences, but who was responsible for this? Seth casually started asking in shops how this unusual trend started. Oh, these? They were popularized by Nico Booz, the best tailor in Delta. It is said he has a unique class. Only the best adventurers in Delta can afford his work. Who wouldn't want to be a superhero after seeing them fight the invaders? The answer was shocking but plausible. A tailor with a unique class was living in Delta. And he was a superhero nerd. How dare he taint his fantasy setting? Of course, Seth was not that upset. He would not do something petty like not selling anything to people in superhero suits. Nothing spoke against wearing the colorful underwear below a splendid armor. With those thoughts, he soon left the shopping district behind. Today he wanted to take a look at the demon district. He had heard that this place had been a relatively unpopular residential area before. The reason it was unpopular was the same reason why the demons chose it. It was relatively close to the volcano. While the rest of the district had a mild climate, here it was warm and humid. It was the place that supplied Delta with geothermal energy before the apocalypse. People did not like to speak about that time, but with the awakening of the volcano, most of those facilities lost function. The area was also plagued by the stench of sulfur and other fumes. The place was already abandoned when the demons arrived. That was all Seth could glean from the short conversations with people. This place was handed over to the demons. In exchange, they made a peace pact and acknowledged the supervision of the Krana Empire. Within Delta, they had to act according to the Empire's and Delta's laws. Seth had an obvious reason for coming here. He was looking for a demon blacksmith to try and learn more ballads. It was interesting since Seth had never been to a demon settlement. Seth was from Earth, and he had seen a province of the Empire, but the demons were something new to him. With wonder, he stepped into the demon district. The differences were so obvious that he felt like stepping through a boundary to a different world. The demons had not held back with modifications to the existing structures. One could still roughly see what the buildings once were, but now they were like a Gothic version of themselves. Opulent ornaments, statues, carvings, and gargoyles decorated the facades. Spires and arches were added and completely changed the overall atmosphere of the city. A light dry mist smelling of sulfur and smoke filled the street he entered. Before, this might have been an obstruction to him, but with Argus eye he could see everything clearly. The place was not split into different areas for living and working. Shop windows were randomly strewn along and across some of the buildings. Even several floors above ground. It reminded him of a quirky version of a historical city. Looking up he could also easily make out the reason for the quirkiness. Many demon races had wings or an inherent ability to fly. Demons were not bound to the earth, so shop windows on higher floors were not weird at all. It felt as if any demon could simply open a storefront and sell stuff from their living room. The streets were not just the ground between the buildings, but the whole gap. In demon territory, one had to think of streets as three-dimensional. They perfectly used the canyons of the modern cityscape for traffic. Seth was stumped as he had not expected this. Although they called themselves demons, their culture was the kind of magical and fantastical he had expected before visiting Aura. Surprised? Yet. I didn't expect this when I thought of a demon district. Did you expect them to be wild and cruel creatures living in lava caves? Maybe a little. Seth didn't deny it. Good, because some of them are. There is a lot greater variety in appearance and behavior among demons. Don't swing from one extreme to the other. Don't think just because they look or act cultured, that they actually are. One does not need to be or look brutal to be cruel. A cave-dwelling demon that looks like he eats children might be one of the nicest demons you will ever meet, while a humanoid one will scam away your souls with a business smile. So, don't judge on appearance and don't trust them too easily. Just treat them like humans, but with even more caution. Like with humans, there are good and really terrible demons. Demons just know how to hide it even better. Seth nodded to show that he understood. It was too soon to be thinking that his image of demons was wrong. A good example was that amicable-seeming caravan leader who turned out to be a human-sacrificing maniac. Still, not all demons planned the destruction of humanity. That made them okay in Seth's book, and he decided that they deserved a chance. Here it was Universal Translation's time to shine. Everything was written in intricate demon characters, and everyone spoke a demon language. Only with the skill, he was able to read the store name and understand the gossip around him. Most of the things he picked up were talks about merchandise and business across different worlds. Names of places and people he had never heard of. Politics of places he would probably never visit. What really became clear was that demons truly were an interdimensional race. It could be gleaned from their everyday talks, that they had been traveling across dimensions since ancient times, and it was something extremely normal to them. Not just the traveling, but also keeping track of political and general news from those worlds. Thinking of this reminded him of the weasel folk, and he realized why these were the main topics. What reason was there to travel across worlds if the goal was not to conquer? Trade. Don't jump to conclusions now. Yes, most of those here are looking for a business. It doesn't mean there are no demons intent to conquer. Don't forget what happened in Aura before we left. Al interrupted him before he could declare them as a race of merchants. Once again, the sorceress was right. He had seen with his own eyes what it looked like when demons wanted to conquer a place. It was really too easy to forget when having this kind of magical and mysterious city before him. Chapter 249. Ballads and epics await. Seth decided to stay open-minded for now. He had a goal in coming here. To sightsee and maybe find a demon blacksmith to learn new ballads. At this point, blacksmithing had become his hobby just as much as his class. There was a lot of satisfaction in creating things and watching his skills grow. He had developed a zeal to make even more and greater stuff. It didn't mean he gave up on his dream of lazing around with Finn and playing games. It just had to wait until he found a way to get electricity in the tower. He already bought a new computer and everything needed to rebuild his man cave. It was just that his urge to get to this dream had become slightly weaker. Seth kept exploring these weird and interesting stores. The most interesting were those with all kinds of weird old artifacts from various different dimensions. For him, it was like visiting an auditorium. Mummified body parts, exotic vases, and stuff he had no idea what they were supposed to be. He started some talks, bought some small things, and covertly asked around about blacksmiths. But nobody even knew what he was talking about. It seemed like blacksmith was not correctly translated by the skill. Al, do you have an idea what is going on? I had only little interaction with demons, I am not expert of their culture. Seth soon gave up this strategy and simply walked around. Maybe if he found a weapon or armor store, he could find out more. As he walked around, he found that there were different zones in the demon district. The misty zone he had entered was one. Another one was enveloped in darkness, and he didn't want to enter. Aether one had fresh, cool, and moist air, and the building around were overgrown with moss and brightly blooming plants. The demons he saw in these kinds of places also differed vastly. It seemed that demons did not divide their living area by utility, but by the races that lived there. Some liked plants, others darkness, or sulfuric mist. Where would he find a blacksmith then? He came back to the mist and followed the sulfuric smell. A demon blacksmith might be one closer to fire, so he would stay in a more volcanic region, right? The rising heat around him affirmed Seth's decision to follow the scent. When he left the mist, he entered an area of volcanic activity. This place was probably hit by the initial activities when the mountain awakened. There was nothing left of the modern structures. Instead, there were houses that looked as if they were formed from molten and cooled stone. They had gardens with splattering hot mud pools, boiling hot springs, geysers, and sulfur wells. This was an environment worthy to be a demon's home. And it was like a blacksmith's district. Every house was actually a workshop with a big sign that showed a sword or a shield. They had no shops to enter and were more like stalls with their wares being presented in front of their doors. There was no fear of theft as powerful spells protected the products from being taken away. Similar to the spell he had used in his own store in Aura. There were not many items on display. It might be that one needed to specially order a weapon based on the display and not directly buy a ready-made weapon. Although not high in number, they had a 50-50th ratio between uncommon and rare. A lot better than what one found in the human district. In exchange they lacked variation. Although every weapon had an effect, the weapons of each shop had at most 2 or 3 different effects overall. One shop had weapon dealt additional fire and wind damage, another's items had bleed and protection. Some made only armor, other only weapons. Only a few did both. Although the variety was lacking, the effects rivaled those Seth could enchant using the smithing ballads. Another peculiarity was that none of these weapons had additional enchantments. There was nothing inscribed on their surface and the rating were mostly based on the used material, not the refinement of the weapon. Seth felt slightly discouraged seeing this, but he kept going. There was no way this was the peak of demonic smithing. He did well in continuing. As he passed the hellish region it became cooled again and the surrounding turned into a kind of medieval setting. There were quite a few luxurious but also archaic-looking buildings. They were not overly decorated, but one could feel the quality by looking at them. In the distance he saw a castle built into the flank of a smaller mountain. The signs here differed somewhat from the ones earlier. They either showed a sword or a shield coupled with a musical note or runes. He looked around and finally found a plaza with several big stores. "Welcome. How may I help you?" He was greeted like this in Earth's common language. Seth entered the only store he had seen with a sword, a shield, and a music rune. The handsome demon behind the counter had a small horn in the middle of his forehead. His skin was a slightly reddish-orange. Seth was slightly stumped being greeted in his mother language and answered in kind. "Hello. Is this your store? Do you sell weapons?" he asked innocently. Currently, he only wore his boots and items made by Nadal. Everything was covered by the cloak he wore. To the demon, he probably looked like someone who had come here on accident while exploring. The demon looked at him with a sly and knowing gaze. "Did you come for a powerful weapon, or did you actually come to learn?" he asked with a kind smirk. Seth was speechless. "I see, probably the latter," the demon asked in a comfortable voice. "Don't worry and speak freely. I know people say that demons are very sly and long-winded. But to be honest we prefer to be direct. How did you know? Your rings. Did you think a demon bard would be unable to appraise your items? You crossed the hellscape of apprentices, so you can't be weak. But you didn't jump on the opportunity to ask for an awesome weapon, so you didn't come searching for that. The ballad used on the ring lacks formal education, you probably used system skills to succeed, right? Seth stared blankly for a moment while he let everything sink in. Was this man a blacksmith? He could appraise epic equipment and even judge the quality of enchantment with just a look. I tried hard learning them, but yet, I probably succeed mostly thanks to the skills I gained from the system. You mentioned a demon bard. What is that? It was the demon's turn to look stunned at his customer. You came all the way here without knowing? Come, let's talk somewhere more appropriate. He waved at Seth to follow and left through the door behind the counter. Seth was a little unsure and equipped his full gear before following, just in case. Similar to Tord's shop in Aura, there was a hallway with a storage room and a smithy behind the counter. He followed the demon down the hallways and out another door. They stood in the nice open kitchen. The demon looked back, and his eyes narrowed a little. Good, you are careful. That's always the best action when interacting with a demon, he smiled understanding. He put some dried herbs in 2 cups and poured boiling water on top. Here, have a cup of tea, and let's talk. With that the demon sat down and offered Seth the seat across from him. Al confirmed that it was just tea and Seth took a sip. It tasted quite refreshing. The demon, Trith, explained to him that a demon bard was their version of a blacksmith. He explained it using the common language because there was no equivalent word for a blacksmith in demon language. A demon bard's specialization was less focused on the blacksmith skill, it was only a secondary skill to them. Their class focused a lot more on the musical and philosophical parts of their class. As a bard, they not only learned ballads and poems to enchant items, they also wrote these epics and ballads themselves. This led to most ballads being unique to their writer, making them a selling point if one decided to pursue this career. This made them similar to enchanters who had to often research or develop enchantments themselves. Does this mean that there is no unified collection of ballads I could learn? Seth was not confident in his talent to write songs or poems. I was just getting there. It would be hard to make a master teach you all their own ballads, but that isn't the only option. You can learn the skill of a demon bard and the classic ballads at the Bard College. As chance would have it, there is a newly founded Bard College here in Delta. Chapter 250. Bard College. Seth's eye twitched. You are telling me to go back to school? No, college. As long as you join you can use the facilities and visit the lessons in any manner you like. And what do I need to join? Seth sighed. Only the recommendation of a certified master, the demon said with a big smile. Like you. Like me. I will give a recommendation letter. Why would you do that? Seth asked warily. Oh, don't worry. I'm not doing this to be nice. I want to get back at someone. Trith was a graduate of a more or less well-known bard college and came to Earth to make a name for himself. He was one of the few bards who made weapons and armor instead of specializing in one of them. His protective and offensive ballads were well praised by his professor, but a rival from the same college had come here earlier than him and discredited his work before Trith even had a chance to show off. What could someone who split his attention even accomplish? Don't bother with that guy and his mediocre stuff. That bastard will send his disciple to the new Bard College, and I want you to crush him. You are already an accomplished blacksmith. And I will do my best to help your studies. All you have to do is show those ignorant people that crafting both weapons and armors is not a joke. You don't have to specifically go against that dude, just be better than him. Ah, there it was. Looking at the raving demon and seeing the burning hatred in the man's eyes. This was a trustworthy demon, all right. Nothing was more trustworthy than someone's burning hatred for an enemy. Was it finally time for his school arc? Seth had never visited a college before. After the death of his parents, he managed the apartment building aside from finishing school. He did not have the chance to be subjected to his parents' aspirations for him. There was no one who forced him to study for a good job. Since he had a regular income as a landlord, he had no reason to pursue higher education or a career. Was this his chance to experience a school life? Hell nah. He totally enjoyed his time at home. But things were different now. He wanted to pursue this knowledge. Although he could probably do without the weird social interactions in school. Trith even threw him at some kind of rival. Alright, I will take a look at your Bard College. But I have a lot of other stuff to manage, so don't expect too much. When does the next semester start? The demon stopped his raving when he heard Seth's answer. There are no such things as semesters. You can matriculate whenever you like. That bastard's disciple matriculated 3 weeks ago. At this point the demon seemed to get some doubts. I saw your rings, but, are you sure you can do it? All the bards at the college have learned blacksmithing before joining. If the gap is not big enough. The demon could only stare gobsmacked when Seth took off the cloak, and he saw the full gear. Almost everything he wore was epic rated. Although they were on the lower end of epic, being able to reliably make epic equipment was a sign of great capability. As long as Seth's abilities grew, there was even the possibility for his epic items to rival legendary gear. All right, I believe in you, Trith said after getting back to his senses. With a smirk, Seth put the cloak back on. Good. Should we do it right now? I have time on hand. A man of action. I'm really starting to like you. Trith took the lead and they walked toward the Bard College. It was the castle Seth had seen in the distance. It's had a really dark school of magic and wizardry vibe. The castle was built from dark volcanic stone. High vaulted ceilings, dark grey stone walls, polished black floors. Not what one would expect from a Bard College. Maybe it was more plausible when the demon was added. Still, it looked more like the castle of a demon king, or something like that. This way is the administration office. You can matriculate here. You only have to fill out a form or show your adventurer card. The two stepped through a big door made of almost black lacquered wood. An old demon lady with a thick pair of glasses and grey hair sat behind a counter. She had fallen asleep, and her head had sunk on her chest while snoring. You are the one with a grudge. You wake her up. Seth said mischievous and took a step back. Trith looked at him helplessly and poked the old lady on the shoulder. Hello? Are you alive? I mean, awake. Hey? What? What the hell do you want? He wanted to matriculate. The demon pointed at Seth. Adventurer card and recommendation, she said, pissed. Seth brought out his card and Trith a letter. Your bard license, she asked the demon, who showed her a scroll. Okay, now you just have to pay the semester fee and I can hand you your study ID. The old lady glared at Seth. Seth looked at Trith. Trith grimaced and brought out a few silver coins to pay the fee. Here's your ID. Welcome to the Bard College. Now go away. And just like that, he had become a student at the Bard College. With that ID you can use the school's facilities, the library, and join the lessons. You can find the plan for lessons in the main hall, I think. Well then, I have to return to my shop now. I leave embarrassing these people to you. With that, the demon ran off. Did he just want to make sure Seth would really join the college? Well, he didn't mind. From what the administration looked like, the place was really as lax as Trith had said. He walked around a little through long hallways with many rooms and soon ended up in the atrium, where he found a plan for lessons. Poesy, singing, songwriting, ancient demon runes, theory of etching, practical forging, dancing, history of bardism. There were practical and theoretical lessons. A lesson that would soon be held was ancient demon runes. Seth was interested in what that subject was supposed to be and decided to look for the room. He arrived with some time to spare. The room was almost empty with 10 minutes to go until the lesson started. Seth sat down and started whittling a bone ring using a small mithril knife. It was a hobby he had picked up during the hours he spent on the wagon's driver's seat beside Drosy. He still had a lot of snake bones, and no matter what he did with them, he did not gain much proficiency. Whittling them into small rings and pendants was no help for his crafting skills, but it helped with the fine control of energy circulation too and reinforcement. Although he did it mostly to kill time, the results were still uncommon items. He would still put them up for sale once he had a shop. As the bone dust kept piling up on the table before him, the other students started trickling in. Hey, you should clean that up before the teacher comes. The professor can get really angry. A cheery-looking demon girl spoke to him and sat down at the table beside him. Her skin was a dark orange with wine red to brown markings and black hair. She had very big eyes that were almost completely filled by her pupils. Seth simply stored the bone dust in his inventory. He could give it to Allison and Evie for their alchemy. Well, thanks. Wouldn't want to be yelled at on my first day, he joked. Your first day? She asked, surprised. Yeah, I just enrolled. Maybe an hour ago. Ho ho, very brave. Not just staying on your first day but even visiting the class. Why? He asked, perplexed. I guess you don't know. The first day is the day of baptism in a bard college. People will come to challenge you. Like, fighting? No, flighting. And that means A poetic duel of taunt and mockery. I guess I have to run. Seth had just stood up when a burly teacher kicked open the door. I know, I'm a little late. Everyone sit down, we will start right away. Chapter 251. Flight or flight reaction. His chance to run was gone. He could only sit back down and pull the cloak deeper into his face. Did Trith run because of this tradition? The noobs had to take ridicule from their seniors? Maybe not, but Seth had no idea about flighting. He would probably be ripped to shreds. Don't worry, if you are lucky you might be able to hide after the lesson. You aren't planning to play nice now and call me out later, are you? She only answered with a mischievous smile. The lesson started and the burly teacher at the front started talking about demonic runes while drawing them on the board. Since Seth had joined in the middle of the semester there was not a lot he understood. One curious thing was, that universal translation did not work on these characters. He could neither read nor write them by just leaving it to the system skill. His heart sank. Would he really have to learn a completely new alphabet? He didn't even know why these runes were so important to begin with. They are runes of power and more than just language. That is probably why your skill isn't working. I think I have seen some similar runes on a demonic sword, but I never found out how demons crafted their weapons. Demons did not share their knowledge randomly. Also was lucky to get her hand on some ballads after much searching. He really should have started in the library instead of randomly joining a lesson. So, why are you here? I mean, what courses do you intend to visit? The girl spoke to him again after some time. Seth leaned back to sit more comfortably. Actually, I just wanted to learn some more demonic forging ballads for enchantment. Some demon talked me into joining this place to learn and ran off after the registration. Seth smiled at her confused look. She couldn't really follow the string of events without any context. Seeing his impish smile, she seemed to realize and also smiled. I think you will do well here, even without experience in flighting. This looked like her first genuine smile during their conversation, and it was instantly wiped off her face when a piece of chalk hit her at the temple. Are you two having a nice conversation in my lesson? You, young people, have more than enough time to flirt outside of my lessons. And you? Take off that cloak. No headdresses in class. The teacher hollered. The room shook under his mighty voice. Seth shrugged and took off the hood of his cloak. A human? The teacher asked, baffled, and the room full of young demons turned their heads in his direction. What? He asked back at their stares. Is it that weird? The teacher was speechless, but a young demon spoke up arrogantly. Of course, it is, dumbass. How would a human get into a bard college? There is nothing here for you. You should run back fast and huddle together with your little human friends before you get hurt. Some of the students laughed. Seth didn't really get the joke, maybe it was lost in translation. I appreciate your concern, but you don't have to worry about me. I doubt there is anyone in this institute that would hurt me, or even be able to. Seth said sincerely, his voice laced with magical charm. Are you implying we are weak? The arrogant demon jumped off his chair. Your words, not mine. But seeing you so upset, you must really be feeling that your power is in fact insufficient. Seth kept mocking with a calm voice. Enough. You can do this stuff outside my lesson. Keegan, sit down, the teacher scolded. Although their argument was interrupted, everyone could see who had the upper hand. One stood in the middle of the room, his body tense and face grimaced. The other was leaning back in his seat, leisurely and relaxed. The teacher glared at the student and continued the lesson. PSST, hey. Are you from Delta or from Krina? His curious table neighbor whispered. I'm originally from Alpha. Alpha? I never heard of it. It doesn't really exist anymore, so it's not weird. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't worry about it. They kept whispering back and forth, making sure the teacher didn't catch them. Seth couldn't understand anything anyway, and he didn't mind being a bad influence. Her name was Ember, and she was invested in the lyrical skills of a demon bard. After gaining Ember's favor, she also gave him some tips to survive college. She also told him that there was a teleportation formation in the school that students could use to travel to the center of Delta. He now knew his next destination. He really had no interest in verbal duels with demons. If he could connect this place directly with Minas Mar, it would become very convenient to come and go. While strolling around, he had not seen this teleportation formation, but the college was completely mapped out with map and he could mark it after listening to Ember. They left the room together but didn't get far before Keegan and a bunch of others blocked their way. You probably think you are something special. Let's see if you are more than just empty talk. I demand a duel in modern fighting. Before Seth could answer, an announcement echoed through the school. The duel between Seth Smith and Keegan Doug in modern fighting has been approved. Please enter arena within the next 10 minutes. Absence is punishable by expulsion. Haha, lucky me. So today is your first day. You can't even refuse the challenge. Keegan said smugly. Seth could only roll his eyes. How bothersome. He just wanted to learn more ballads. What was with these school kids? What is modern fighting? He asked Ember beside him. I explained fighting, right? It was more of a fun sport for ancient bards. Modern fighting incorporates fighting, aside from competing and mocking the opponent. Officially it is to accommodate those that may lack talent in lyrics but shine in other areas. It's just a brawl with dumb trash talk if you ask me, she said. Oh, and here I was about to be worried. I have no confidence in coming up with good lyrics. Especially during a fight. By the way, who is this Keegan? He's quite aggressive. The grandson of the chairman. He's more or less talented in fighting and forging. When his skills are not enough, he can fall back to his grandfather's backing to evade punishment. She said, annoyed. The chairman's talented son? You better wish me luck. Seth said sarcastically as the crowd walked towards the arena. You don't need it. I saw you casually carving an uncommon ring to kill time. If somebody needs luck, then it's Keegan. The arena was located in one of the castle's inner courtyards, close to the teleportation formation. Seth glanced at Ember, who could only give an apologetic smile. He put her into the frenemy drawer for now. The arena was a wide elevated square tiled with thick stone slabs. Before the duel started, the judge explained the rules. Aside from fighting, they had to take turns taunting the opponent in lyrical verses. Keegan entered the stage from the opposite side. It was almost cute seeing him be arrogant. He was barely above level 20 and his equipment was mostly uncommon. Aside from his uncommon leather armor set, he wore a rare necklace and a rare mace. Although the ratings were nothing special, the effects were on another level compared to those available in Delta. Most adventurers would be over the moon having these items, but it could not be compared to Seth's loadout. At this point, Keegan's arrogance and conceited expression were just cute. Like a haughty puppy. Are you ready? The judge looked between the two opponents. Begin. Chapter 252. Flight or Flight Reaction, 2. Puny human, hear me preach. Don't grasp for stars you cannot reach. Keegan shouted as he charged toward Seth, swinging his mace. He didn't bother letting Keegan get close and struck down with his mighty rod. The demon barely evaded the half-heartedly swung staff. Arim, my stick is long, yours is short, seeing you wave it makes me snort. He rushed forward and stabbed Keegan's abdomen, hurling him across the ground. Keegan tried to prop himself up and speak, but a wake of vomit came out instead. Ew, I'm disgusted and appalled, return back into the hole from whence you crawled. With that, Seth kicked the hunched-over Keegan off the stage. Judge, take the lead, please announce this puppy's defeat. The judge nodded. Winner, Seth Smith. Good, I will leave now. I challenge you to a duel. One of Keegan's lackeys stepped up to the stage and the duel was automatically announced. Seth face-palmed. He defeated the lackey even easier than Keegan. Before he could leave, another came to the stage. Were they trying to tire him out with some kind of human wave tactic? There was only one thing he could do. You are strong, I give you that. But against me you will fall flat, the third lackey charged at him. I am tired of this fight, let's see you measure up to dragon might. The force spread across the whole card and further beyond. Even the judge buckled under the force and kneeled. I don't care what you guys planned, don't challenge me if you can't stand. He deactivated the effect and left the stage in the direction of the teleportation formation and returned to Mina's march. This day was interesting, but it ended a little annoying. 30 seconds later in the yard. What happened here? A regal-looking demon wizard entered the yard where the students were still recovering from the dragon might. A great part of the college had been affected by Seth's item effect. A human attacked the college. Keegan lied without blushing and promptly got a bitch slap from the judge, who continued to explain. A new student established the new pecking order, that's all. Hey, what's up boss? Link asked as Seth sat down in the cafeteria. He needed some food to lighten his mood. Oh, nothing much. I enrolled at a bard college, heard a lesson, had some duels. The usual. A bard college? There was something like that, he asked with an amused smile before setting down several plates filled with all kinds of food. Lately, Link had upgraded his skill and it became easier to get permanent effects. The only problem was that there were not many ingredients that could really improve their attributes. The best the food did was raise some of the resistances. Seth didn't really mind the lack of permanent buffs. Much more important was the taste. Since the gourmet hunter was able to focus on cooking, the taste had gone through the roof. He had spent almost as much time in the cafeteria as he had at restaurants and food stalls during the last few days. After the meal, Seth went to check on the mana converter. They had wanted to keep some leeway, so the device sucked roughly 15% of the overall possible energy production of the tower. The output of one of the 4 formations left. With this power, the machine could crystallize 5 big mana crystals a day. The crystals were about the size of a thermos bottle and of a light blue and green color. One of these crystals could be sold to the Empire for 50 gold. Almost 250 gold a day. With roughly 20% needed for the usual operation, there was about 65% untapped potential energy left in case they needed it for something. Seth had actually asked whether they wanted to buy more, but Lewis had told him in secret that 5 crystals were enough already to power the city's normal operation for half a day. They already had sources for the rest and no budget to buy more than needed. Thinking of the city, his thoughts wandered back to the Bard College. He had left a little too fast. He had not gained anything. He had not even gotten the chance to look at the library. He would return the next day. But what should he do in the meantime? The day was far from over. Cat's was doing its bodyguard job today, so he couldn't call Mina and the others to hand around. Hey Lydia, he peeked into the Cybergotha's room. She had mostly recovered from her injuries and left the med bay a couple of days ago. All that the visible sign that remained were the curse scars. They were patches of mottled skin with colors ranging between dark red and purple. One would not see much if she wore conventional clothes. But for Lydia, who liked to wear kind of revealing clothes, it was hard to hide them. The choice was to either change her clothing style or deal with the consequences of showing them off. No matter which she chose, it would take some time to get used to it. Wanna go to Delta and have some fun? Seth was bored and he thought that it was probably not the best to let the young woman brood over this alone in her room. Sure, let's go. Lydia had lost some of the bright light he had seen when they first met. It was not just what had happened. But it was her own family that did it. They appeared in the church and entered the city. Seth had an idea what to do and maneuvered the unmotivated cybergoth in a specific direction. Before she could register where they were going, they had already entered the amusement district. Book cafes, internet cafes, arcades, gaming stores, movie theaters. Although the internet did not work, power did. What better way to distract oneself from reality than to play some games and watch a movie? The two spent the rest of the day playing games and watching movies. Seth had also spent some time with Mina and Finn here, but it was all much too new to them to be a challenge for him. Lydia, on the other hand, was a capable opponent in most games. Maybe it was no permanent solution, but for this one evening, Lydia had started to smile again, as if she had forgotten what had happened. They returned to the tower when it was dark. Using the momentum, Seth got everyone to have a big dinner together. Lydia had eaten alone the last few days and Seth hoped spending time with everyone would change it and help her to keep getting better in the future. Seth wasn't the best in feelings, but maybe one of the others could do a better job in sharing Lydia's burden. In the end, he didn't stay to see whether his hopes came true. He excused himself early and vanished to his quarters with Mina. Nobody wondered about it since their relationship had become more or less official in the last week. The only one unhappy about this was the spicy sorceress. Her resentment did not last long after Seth summoned her in the red light district and gave her 50 gold to do whatever she wanted. He felt sorry to have released this calamity onto the innocent people of this business, but not sorry enough to not have done it. Their hips were a sacrifice he was willing to make. Chapter 253. Working. Seth's break ended that day and he started to seriously work on the development of Minasmar and his own skills. The first step was leaving everything concerning the store to Mary and Jane. The two wanted to be the administrative personnel. Then they should take care of finding a good location, registering a business and everything else needed. Seth took care of connecting the tower to the college. It was easier than expected. The Demon District had its own interference field and with his student ID, he already had the permit to access the teleport formation. Now he could enter the college from Minasmar whenever he wanted. Before anything, he went to visit Trith after breakfast. They had some things to work out. The store was still closed, but Seth simply banged at the door until a drowsy Trith opened the door. A shove, a step, and a turned key later Seth stood inside the locked store with the demon. His sleepy head slowly started heating the engines and got the idea that maybe he was in danger. Seth. You are pretty early. Good work yesterday during the flighting. I heard about it, very impressive. Seth took a step closer to Trith. You know, you should have told me about it. You left before explaining anything. What about helping me in every way possible? I just thought it would be a fun surprise. My promise is valid, I will help you in every way I can. Good, very good. The next 2 hours proceeded like an interrogation. While Seth sat on the store's counter and asked questions, Trith sat before him on the ground in a seiza position and answered. Let's start with demonic runes. I sat in a lesson about them yesterday but didn't really get what they are used for. We use them to etch ballads and epics onto weapons and armor to have the great demons bestow them with power. This was even news for Alzalsa. Wait, aren't you using ballads for that? It's different. It's like how you are using a ballad and engraving to enchant something. It was a difference in the manifestation of power. Ballads were used to directly ask a request from a demon and the effects often came at a price. Their effects depended not just on the ballad but also on the quality of the recitation. Etching runes was slightly more complicated. A demon bard would use a special acidic ink to etch a poem, an ode, or even the text of a whole ballad onto an item. The ink would contain a catalyst like dissolved beast cores. There was a lot bigger margin for variation when using etching instead of carving circuits. While circuits had effects that depended on the root of magic power, etchings would store the bestowed power of a demon as an activated or permanent effect. There were many ancient and standard texts for etching that called upon some of the oldest and strongest demon lords in hell. Similar to elemental lords, they had almost lost their entire ego by fusing with the world. These texts were guaranteed to work, and their strength was only limited by the execution of the etching and the materials used. But one could also write their own works, and these were a free-for-all. One could write something original or praise a specific lord to maybe gain their attention. One could even spite a demon to gain their opponent's blessings. The results varied drastically. An etching could have no effect at all, or a very weak one. But when a strong demon lord liked your work, it might end up stronger than the used materials justified. Ballads were also like this. Some standard ballads were guaranteed to work, but original ones could also exert a tremendous effect. For these reasons, the Bard College was founded. Here, one would not only learn the basic skills, but also the characteristics of the different demon overlords. How something had to be written or sung to increase the chance of a specific effect. Also, how to use these skills in battle. In the end, they were also bards. The power of demons could be borrowed in battles to attack or support. Demon bards could pursue many paths, not just the one of a pseudo-blacksmith. It was this complexity that led to people specializing in specific kinds of ballads. Some only wrote to one or two demons besides using the standard texts. This also led to the blacksmith kind splitting in defensive and offensive gears. Seth didn't really care about the use in battle, he was especially interested in etching. He had already thought about learning how to etch, to embellish his products. It sounded interesting, even though he had no high hopes for original texts. Now that he had a rough understanding of what he needed, he returned to the Bard College. He wanted to see how etching worked with his own eyes and checked the lesson plan. There was an etching practice twice a day, every day of the week. The next one was 2 hours later. Using this time productively, he entered the library. The big door opened automatically after stepping before them and gave way into a gigantic room. It seemed much bigger inside than from the outside. Bookshelves several tens of meters in height with galleries and reading alcoves. Seth was a little lost, but the bored librarian was happy to explain things to him. The most convenient feature was the inventory search. He could write down the themes he was looking for and get an assortment of fitting books to choose from. It didn't take long to get the books on the ancient runes. Originally, he did not have much motivation to learn a new alphabet, but this kind of enchantment could open unknown possibilities. On top of that, the ancient demon runes were not that hard to learn. There were about 100 characters and they more or less corresponded to the current demon language he could translate with his skill. He also found some books on the ancient poems and odes Trith had mentioned. When it was time for the etching practice, he lent the best books he could find and left the library. The classroom for etching practice was long with many rows of tables. The students already present had not sat down yet and were collected at the entrance. There were 3 kinds of reactions. Some shrunk back, most didn't care, and one person approached him. It was a familiar face. Ember, his new frenemy, greeted him with a smile. Wow, I didn't think you would be back so fast after causing such a commotion yesterday. Don't challenge me if you can't stand and making the whole audience kneel. So overbearing, she teased him with his own line. It wasn't his fault. The whole flighting thing was a cheesy duel, to begin with. Why is everyone just standing here? He changed the topic. We are waiting for the teacher. Students are only allowed to work with the ink with a teacher's supervision. The ink we use for practice may be common rated, it's still volatile and dangerous. They couldn't talk for long as soon a burly female teacher arrived. She looked like the female version of the burly teacher for the ancient runes. She ushered the student to take a seat. On every table were ink and a steel plate prepared like a piece of paper. There was also a brush. Okay, here is today's task, she said, and sheets of paper flew to every table. They depicted the runes they were supposed to copy today. Seth was still looking at the paper when she approached him. You are Seth, right? The new student. Let me explain how it works. And she really took her time to explain to Seth how the ink and brush were to be used and the most important safety rules when handling the acidic ink. She also helped him with the first few strokes. This etching was different from the one Seth knew. For decorative etching, one would normally need something like wax to seal the parts of metal the acid was not supposed to attack. Then the area would be submerged in acid for as long as need. This kind of inscribing runes was very different. The characters were directly drawn on the metal with the acid that ate away at the steel at a visible speed. It was not just an act of dissolving as normal acid would work, but it was almost like soldering. After eating into the metal, the acid would harden into a kind of dark enamel that was fused to the workpiece. It was a very interesting process to work with and watch. Seth could also feel a very weak but peculiar aura from the ink and enamel. It reminded him of the Ivisor energy he had found in the ancient bronze and the celestial bronze. The energy was similar to the soul energy of infused souls. Was it because the ink used materials like monster cores as ingredients? The reason was not important. It planted a persistent idea in his mind which only became more prominent after being shared with and confirmed by Alzalsar. If he could create an ink that worked on the soul armament, it might be possible to layer the etchings on the soul with the circuits on the physical armor. He might have found a way to circumvent the bleeding through effect he had come across before. His motivation to learn this craft had made another leap. Chapter 254. Music Mantis. Etching the runes became quite fun once he got into the rhythm. His high dexterity and experience in engraving were a big help in guiding the brush. If he kept going like this, he would be able to gain the corresponding skill in a matter of hours. He could have gone on until then, but the exercise ended after 2 hours. Seth had the books on runes and ballads and a rough idea about how etching worked. It was time to leave for the day. He wanted to get some ink from Trith and keep practicing until he got the skill. On his way to leave the college, he heard someone call from behind. Hey, wait! Where are you going? Ember came running from behind. I'm leaving. Isn't that obvious? But you only visited one lesson and you are already leaving again? Singing practice is next. How about joining? Singing, the black mark in his life as a blacksmith. He still vividly remembered the weird effects when he tried to use smithing ballads. No, he was about to decline when he realized something. He had a talent for demon ballads. Trith had mentioned that the execution of his ballads was lacking. He was too reliant on Orpheus' voice. This was the Demon Bard College, the songs they taught would be demon songs, right? Maybe it was worth giving it a re. Okay, where is the practice? Seth still didn't know what exactly to think of Ember, but no matter what she planned, he now had his own interest in the singing exercise. The demon girl led the way and they arrived at the music hall. Instruments for practice were stacked to one side and a small group of students were already present. You are late, a strict-looking teacher with a taut bun said. With her sharp glasses and thin face, she resembled a mantis. Maybe an insect demon? Get your lyrics and get in position. We start with choir and change to single practice later. Ah, Miss Tang. This is the new guy. Ember said and pointed at Seth. The human who caused a commotion yesterday, the mantis lady asked, interested. Then let's start with you. Show me your skills. I'm sorry, but I only know some forging ballads and I never sang outside the smithy. Follow me. The teacher brought him to a side door behind which was actually a small smithy. Take some of the steel here and start forging. The rest of the students were huddling at the door to see the show. Seth simply shrugged. With a snap of his finger, the coal forge was ignited. He didn't intend to show off, but under the influence of his skill, the metal was ready for forging within record time. The teacher had told him to forge, so he forged and started singing the blood ballad. The teacher's expression didn't change, but the students looked very confused. As he sang, dark notes and runes exited his mouth and fused into the steel he kept folding on itself. The smithy shuddered under the deep vibrations of his voice, and the students looked even more confused seeing the dark runes. What they heard and saw was a weird dissonance between the song, the impression it gave, and its effect. The overall song seemed impressive and beautiful, but they could hear the weird skips and mistakes in the vocals. Despite those, the effect was exemplary. On the anvil lay an almost black blade of a dagger when the last verse of the ballad ended. The students were whispering among themselves, but the teacher nodded understandingly. You have a skill that helps with singing, right? Can you do another one but turn off that skill? Seth had an inkling where this was going but did as he was asked. He toggled off Orpheus' voice and started again with a new piece of steel. The difference between the two attempts was most prominent to Seth, as he felt that the effects were much weaker, and it was harder to hit the right notes. Still, he had used the ballad so often, at this point, he knew it by heart and still succeeded in it. Do you think you could turn off your translation skill, too? The teacher asked after the second attempt. Seth was unsure. Without the skill, he could only try to imitate the song. Seeing him hesitate, Miss Tang closed the door to the smithy so other students could no longer watch. I am not doing this to disgrace you. You are a student, and I am here to help. I need to know your baseline to help you. Please try without the skill. Seth nodded. He really had nothing to lose here. On the contrary, if he could not just gain more ballads but improve his overall skill, it would be a huge gain. Once again, he took a piece of steel and started the ballad. He knew the meaning of the word and imitated the sound. The result was not good. There were many mistakes and the string of notes was disrupted and sparse. The effect on the blade was a weak increase of the wearer's toenail growth. He had failed miserably. There was no need to feel disheartened though. Seth already knew this would be the outcome. Without the skill, there was no chance he could succeed in singing a forging ballad in a foreign language. He reactivated universal translation before the teacher gave her verdict. Contrary to his expectation, the teacher confirmed what Al had said to him back then. You have a great talent. The fact that you even managed to contact an ancestor, just by imitating the sound and rhythm, is outstanding. What you need to do now, is seriously learning the demon language. The translation skill is a disruptive element that gets in the way of the music's effects. Seth remembered that Al-Zalsar had mentioned something similar at one point. Universal translation was great for normal conversation, but when it came to magic where the language used was very important, it could become a problem. Did you hear me? Have you reactivated the translation skill? Yes, sorry, teacher. I was just lost in thought. When I manage to learn the demon language, will it increase the effect of the ballads? Not necessarily. The effect of a ballad is based on the text and the quality of recitation. With your skills, you are already able to make the most of a ballad like this. What will increase is the efficiency. Leaving it to your skills to mend your mistakes puts a huge strain on the ballad's operation, leading to increased consumption of mana and even mental energy. When it comes to longer and more complicated ballads, this will be a huge disadvantage. It may even lead to a catastrophic failure. Thank you for your advice. Seth had a lot to think about. The workload kept increasing more and more. Looking for the texts of new ballads had led him to learn ancient runes and etching, and now he was even contemplating learning a whole new language. The thing was, that he felt confident that he could actually do it. Although it was one of his lower attributes, he still had 3 times more than the normal human limit. Intelligence increased the memory and speed at which information could be processed. Learning a new language posed no great hurdle at this point. Especially if he could increase his int with some items to boost the learning speed. It was the same for the ancient runes and ballads. As long as it was simply memorizing information, he felt confident. Miss Tang allowed him to leave through the back door after organizing his thoughts. It didn't make much sense to stay in the lessons when the first thing he needed to improve was learning the language. To his surprise, Ember followed him a few minutes later. I saw that you didn't return, so I ditched the lesson and came. Was Miss Tang hard on you? I can help you exercise if you want to. I'm pretty good at singing. Singing will have to wait a little longer until I mastered the demon language. But do you know a shop where I can get more of the ink for etching? Her face fell a little when he switched the topic from music to crafting. Ah, sure. There are a few alchemist shops that sell common ink in the city. The is one that people keep talking about. Wait, alchemist shops? Yet? Who do you think makes the ink? It's not like this stuff is just bubbling out of wells, she said sarcastically. She didn't know that Seth's thoughts were already back at Mina's march. He had an aspiring alchemist and a witch. Wouldn't they be able to make ink for him, if he got some recipes? The two, the blacksmith and the demon girl, got on their way into the city. Chapter 255. Grinding the edge. Ember brought him to a big alchemy store. The showroom was vast and open with aisles of potions and shelves of ingredients. It gave him the impression of a mix between pharmacy and a witch's kitchen. The strong smell of herbs, dried stuff, and potions filled the air. Beside the clerk at the counter, there were 2 or 3 employees helping customers find and choose what they needed. Seth felt satisfied when he could not only buy a bulk of common ink but even got it for free on top of purchasing a demonic encyclopedia of alchemy recipes including several kinds of inks for etching. The book was big, thick, and pricey. 23 gold was enough for a farmer to live for almost 2 years. But it was worth it. Allison liked her books big. Imagining the quiet girl's reaction when Seth visited her with this girthy surprise made him smile. They got on their way back to the college. Seth wanted to return to Mina's Mar and start practicing. You are well off, aren't you? Spending so much money in a heartbeat and still smiling like a child that got a present. Ember commented on his expression. She looked a little sulky. I bet she's jealous. Yeah. I guess one could say I'm well off. Others might even call me filthy rich, he teased the young demon beside him. How? Aren't you just a human? How can you have so much money to spend in a world like this? I'm simply a very good blacksmith. It's no big secret. You are a blacksmith. Yep. Oh, that reminds me, I have to go in here for a second. They had just walked past Trith's store when Seth remembered that he wanted to talk to the demon. Seth. Trith was reading a book at the counter when suddenly the door opened and surprised him. Hey. I came because you said you would help me with learning. Seth pinned him on his promise. The demon could only sigh. It wasn't like he could use any customers as an excuse. Sure, what do you need? A brush and goggles for etching, and I want you to get me materials to learn demon language. Why do you ask me for language learning material? The demon cocked his head. Well, you are the only demon who owes me. Who else am I going to ask for something elementary like that? I see, but can't you just buy the skill? No, I already have a translation skill. The teacher said that's the problem. I need to truly master the language to take advantage of the ballads. Yeah, and I am telling you there is a skill for that. Trith looked at him like he was being stupid. There is a difference between a translation skill and a language mastery skill. High-rank scribes sell language skills all the time. It's not even that expensive, the demon explained. Great, then get me one of those scrolls instead, Seth said with a smile. Wait, I said they are not that expensive, but they still. You said you would help me in any way possible to further my studies. Fine, Trith said with a fed-up face. He vanished for a moment into the room behind the counter and came back with a few brushes and goggles. Here, take these. I will go and look for the language skill in the next few days. Thank you very much. Just go away, please. Seth left with a big smile and joined Ember on their way back to the college. Do you know the shop owner or something? Sure, why do you ask? Oh, good. It's just that I worried you bought something in there. And what would be the problem with that? Ember looked a little embarrassed when she realized that she had bad-mouthed someone Seth knew. Sorry. It's like this, people say the man is a scammer who only sells mediocre stuff for full price. Is it because he is making both, armor and weapons? How did you know? Oh, I actually made a deal with him for joining the Bard College. He was quite famous where he graduated, but some old rival came earlier and spread those rumors. Now, nobody is even giving him the chance to prove them wrong. Sounds like the very generic revenge plot. Yep, but it's not like I care. He just asked me to do well and show people that someone could do both and still make superior equipment. There was also something about the apprentice of his rival, but he didn't even tell me the name. It can't be important then. My thoughts, Exactly. They soon entered the college and came before the teleport formation. They told their farewells and parted ways. Ember had classes while Seth couldn't wait to make his alchemist produce ink. Give Allison a nice present. He returned to Minas Mar and looked for the wizard. She had locked herself in the alchemy laboratory. Only after several knocks did the door open slightly and a moody Allison looked at him. What is it, boss? I'm doing an experiment right now. Seth brought out the thick tome and waved it before her eyes. Her eyes followed the book without letting it go. Look what I got for you. It's an encyclopedia of demonic alchemy recipes. Did you want it? Give it, she snapped and tried to steal it from his hands. Seth hurriedly pulled it away. Not so fast. It comes with a task. Allison looked a little surprised. It was the first time Seth had come with a specific task. He took out a bottle of ink and gave it to her. There are recipes in the book for ink like this. I want you to make several charges of common and uncommon inks. Just ask Jane for the money if you need ingredients. The wizard/alchemist looked at the bottle with interest. She had only been grinding consumable potions to increase her proficiency until now. All right, give me the tome and I will get to work. Wait a moment, there is one more thing. Seth suddenly had an idea and showed her the books he had gotten at the Bard College. Books about demon poetry, ballads, and ancient runes. Where did you get these? Allison asked in surprise. I got them at the Bard College. Why? Bard College? Is there, like a library? Her eyes shone. She really deserved her title bookworm. She had managed to read all the books in the church's library in Y City. Is there something special about the books? Exactly. They are judged as useful knowledge by my skill. I could gain a lot if there were more like these. Seth suddenly had an idea. There is a pretty big library. Say, Allison, are you interested in poetry and songwriter? Where did that come from? She asked back in surprise but answered anyway. I'm no good with music, but I liked poetry. It was my hobby, before all this happened. Great. I have a good idea. How about you learn demon poetry and write the texts in my stead? He painted a great future. Allison could read all the cumbersome knowledge, gain strength, and write poems for him. And he would only have to do the etching. No thanks, boss. I'm really not interested in demon poetry. Please don't try to push your work on me. She flat out denied their glorious future and left Seth in the darkness of having to learn everything himself. Oh well, I will let you read the books anyways when I am done with them. Leaving the tome in Allison's hands, he returned to his quarters. There was stuff to train. Contrary to the exercise at the college, Seth didn't intend to waste the ink. He had a book with a collection of classics he could copy on items. Only when he had started reading through this book did he realize just how many demons there were. On the 200 pages of the book were over 250 longer and shorter poems dedicated to almost as many different demons. The effects of these inscriptions were based on the demon and almost every demon gave a different effect. They could be roughly categorized like enchantments and they were noted down with the expected effect and the expected strength if executed correctly. The book offered a variety of simpler texts and gave an overview of the kinds of possible effects. Chapter 256. Grinding the Etch, 2. Seth already had a plan on what to use for practice. Cerberus had been pumping out more than enough blanks that could be used as practice pieces. After refining them, he could etch them. If he succeeded, he could assemble them into a finished weapon. It was also a way to build up a stock of general merchandise for the store. Compared to the simple exercise at the college, this was a step up in difficulty. It was not just copying the runes, but he also needed to adjust their size and fit them to the weapon. His only help was the 101 of etching. A textbook on common practices for demon bards. Gladly it was very similar to the principles of engraving inscriptions. When the item was finished these ancient runes would look like intricate ornamental inlays. He started with a short verse not much longer than 2 sentences. The effects of these demon enchantments resembled those of the ballads. Unlike the circuits from the Empire who often came with specific numerical values, these effects were vaguer. The verse he chose was supposed to slightly increase strength and speed during a fight. The verse called on a minor demon noble of war. Without the help and guidance of the skill, it was a lot of work. Applying too much ink could eat through the material. Mistakes when etching a rune led to failure. Getting the spacing between runes wrong led to failure. Spelling mistakes obviously led to failure. Practicing the individual runes first before going over to trying and write sentences now made sense. It took some time to enter the zone. He was hyper-focused on the task. After a few hours and ruining more than 20 sword blanks, Seth finally succeeded in completing the verse. Ding! You have acquired the skill Etching, Beginner, Leave 1. Ding! Etching has been added to your enchantment catalog. Finally. Seth opened the enchantment window. Besides engraving, forging ballads, and enchanting, it now displayed etching. The rules were similar to the forging ballads. The etching needed to be learned before they were added as an entry. Etching only gave little help in actually learning and executing the various texts. The bigger improvement came with the fact that the skills could now interact. Similar to engraving, he could now use blueprint as a guide to help to place the inscription on different weapons. Like with ballads, he would need to learn inscriptions one by one on his own. Maybe he could also scan weapons to get the inscriptions. That was something he needed to test in the future. For now, he finished off the sword that had helped him gain the skill. Seeing the completed item roused new questions. Battle Sword. Uncommon. Damage, 300. Durability, 900. 1 Strength is slightly increased corresponding to wielder's valor. 2 Agility is slightly increased corresponding to the wielder's valor. A simple sword with intricate rune works. A practice piece of journeyman smith. There was a big difference in base stats compared to the swords he made when he first started owing to his growth in skill. The enchantment itself was a little vague, but that was not the weird thing. The peculiarity was that the inscription granted 2 effects. Seth suddenly wondered whether there were different levels among ballads and poems, just like there were among enchantments. Enchantments were ranked according to their complexity, and the higher one's skill, the easier and more enchantments one could add to an item. The technical aspect of etching the phrases was not that difficult. Not with his dexterity and previous experience in engraving. So it couldn't be that they were ranked by complexity like circuits were. After the things Trith had told him and what he had read, instead of wrecking his brain alone, he asked his handy pocket lich icon. Are you serious? Of course, songs and forging ballads, too, are ranked according to the ranks of the system. Writing an epic ballad is a bard's greatest aspiration. How would I know? It's not written in the book. Seth had simply chosen ballads based on their length since he judged them easier. Of course, it isn't. Why would they write down something any bard profession can see at a glance? Seth was stumped. It made sense that he could not see the ranks of things outside his profession, like materials. It was just that he never really thought about it when it came to stuff like texts. It reminded him of the time when Nadal explained to him that the same material can also have a different value depending on the profession. It also led his thought to a different profession. Then, is it the same for enchanters? Yes, it's the same for us. A high-rank enchanter could create a rare or epic enchantment, just like you create gear, and raise an item's rating by enchanting it. Seth sat down. The new insight led to a few realizations. How mean was it that he needed to do so much to make an epic item and an enchanter could simply wave a staff and power up a crappy item? What nonsense are you thinking? Enchanters also need materials to execute their skills, just like you. Actually, being an enchanter is a lot more costly, since all the materials are lost if the enchantment fails. You can just recycle your failed products. An enchanter can't. Imagine having to collect over 20 kinds of rare and epic ingredients for one try and fail. I needed over 100 years to become a master. And I never managed to make a legendary enchantment. Frustration was seeping from Al's voice. A lot of her time as a lich was spent collecting materials for enchantments. A little embarrassed for his childish thoughts, Seth apologized. The sorceress told him it was okay, but stayed silent from then on. Seth got some food and returned to master another inscription. After hours of practice, the execution of the second was a little easier. The second inscription was one that had a similar effect to burning mana. Seth had felt confident when he started practicing it, but his expression soon turned grim. Although the text only had 2 sentences, he could feel something gnawing on his mind. This was most likely a higher-ranked verse than the first one. It was not a problem for Seth, who had a vast pool of mental energy at this point. He just needed to get accustomed to it, so it would not disturb him while writing the inscription. The text seemed much simpler, but Seth still needed 7 tried before he succeeded the first time. Not all his item effects that helped during a fight when using pyrokyne ice worked on reducing the costs of etching. As such, he had spent almost a quarter of mental energy on these 7 attempts. The resulting dagger was interesting. Mana Bite. Rare. Damage, 230. Durability, 500. 1 Elufs of the Asuriant will feast on target's mana for 5 seconds, preventing any magic or active skills from being used. A not-so-simple dagger with intricate rune works. A practice piece of journeyman smith. Demonic arts have bestowed this item with an unusual effect. The material he used for the dagger was the usual uncommon high-quality steel, but the dagger got a rare rating with just the inscription added to it. There was no soul, no enchantment, no ballad. Just the text had been enough. It could only be guessed that the verse was at least rare rated and had high requirements to be used. Seth doubted there would be an epic poem in a book called 101 of Etching. The effect was also nothing to scoff at. Sealing active skills and magic for 5 seconds while burning an unknown amount of mana was quite terrifying in a battle. He might even be able to give it to Mina as is. Looking at the dagger, he found the metal of the blade under a big strain. This might have been the reason the durability was lowered. It also gave him an idea of why it had put such a strain on him to write the text. If this was a rare poem and he was using common ink, maybe the lowered durability and heightened consumption were the effect of this disparity. The ink was not powerful enough on its own to contain the demon's blessing, so he had to pay a price. It was getting late and Seth decided to stop for the day. He went for dinner to the cafeteria where he met most of the others. Yul Katzfer had just returned and were decimating a table of food. Finn and Mina waved at him while the rest of the party greeted him. He joined them at the table. "What's up, guys?" he asked as he sat down. "The princess keeps us busy," Mike answered, exhausted. "Sucks to be you." "Oh yeah, Mina. Take this. I know it doesn't look like much, but the effect is pretty handy." He slid the ordinary-looking dagger to her and explained the perks and effect. He also promised to make a better one in time. But the last part was not heard anymore, as not just Mina, but also the rest of the party was looking at the dagger with round eyes. Since everyone was distracted, Seth started hoarding the food. "It can really seal skills and magic for a short time. That's what the description says." "Cool, right," he said between 2 bites. "Cool? This is a mage killer. Finn wants gloves with that effect," the tiny fairy screamed with eyes shining like lasers. Her gaze almost burned a hole into the munching Seth's skull. "Gimme! Gimme! Gimme!" Seth could hear her silently chanting like a small child trying to manipulate its parent. "Burpa, much better. Sure, I will try to make you one," he said, satisfied after sucking up the biggest part of the food on the table. While everyone was focused on debating about the dagger, he had stolen their food while waiting for Link to bring his. They could only sigh and ask Link to get some more. "Oh yeah, any news about the Willis family?" Seth asked since they had the chance to talk. "No signs of them. Nowhere," Mike answered. "Weird." Chapter 257. Grinding the Edge, 3. Somewhere in Delta. "I still can't believe they managed to kill Uncle Valen. Stop calling that monster Uncle already. What are we supposed to do now? I might have an idea. I met a bunch of people during my last journey. They might be able to help us." "That sounds like a plan." Bard College. The next day after gaining the etching skill, Seth visited Trith's shop. A very disheveled demon opened the door. "What happened to you? You look like you fought a rabbit imp." "And whose fault is that?" the moody demon asked, aggravated. "Did your neighbor let loose a rabbit imp or something?" "No. I had to get that stupid skill scroll for you. I searched through most scribe shops in this city to find one. Here. Go away. I will close shop for today." Seth didn't expect the demon to be this dedicated. He gladly took the scroll and left him alone. It was not a good idea to absorb the skill right now. Seth returned to Minas Mar to use the scroll. He sat down on his bed in his private quarters and calmed down to absorb the skill. The feeling of having foreign knowledge crammed into one's skull didn't hurt but was not pleasant either. The user would not want to be at an insecure place when experiencing it. Strings of foreign vocabulary and characters filled his mind and overwhelmed his brain until they found a neat niche to settle in. Ding! You have learned the skill Demon Language, Adept, Level 4. Adept Level 4 was the level of a native speaker, and the skill was much neater than learning it himself. When he learned Old Alphys, the ancient language of Alpha, in school he often had problems remembering the vocabulary. With the skill, he could smoothly switch between Common and Demon Language. He could now easily understand Demon Language as what it was and speak it. The problem was that he now understood Demon Language and exactly what it meant. Even when one learned another language, it would often still have a mist of ignorance which made especially songs in that language sound better than ones in the native language. Many of the poems now sounded slightly silly when he read them with his new understanding. The next step would be texting the forging ballads after shutting off universal translation. For the test, Seth took a piece of steel and started working it into a simple bracer. A jolt went through his body when he heard the ballad for the first time without the translation skill as an intermediary. At first glance, the demon language was jarring and dissonant to human ears, but it plugged a string in Seth's heart. Al had once said he had a talent and the teacher had confirmed it. Now Seth found that the demon music also fit his taste. It was a powerful and hard language that granted energy and might to a song. It could move his heart and tickle a very special spot for him. His motivation grew and his song became more and more empowered. The dark runes and notes that came with the ballad carried a dark red aura that illuminated the room and fought the bright soul fire for supremacy. Although he was not the greatest singer, he brought the power while Orpheus' voice added the technique. And like the teacher had said, the resource consumption had drastically reduced. Although he had never had a problem with only the ballads, if he for example added infusing a soul on top of it, he would have a hard time splitting his concentration. Although the teacher had mentioned that his skill was already helping to get the optimum out of his ballads, the result showed a slight increase in performance. Reflective bracer. Uncommon. Physics defense, 150. Durability, 800. 117% of the received damage will be reflected to the attacker. An enchanted bracer. A practice piece of journeyman smith enchanted with radiant fervor. Maybe this was the effect of Orpheus' voice? Seth was never good at singing and always felt embarrassed when he had to sing. It was different now. Singing with the demonic language invigorated him. Knowing this and realizing that ballads and poetry also had their own ratings, Seth decided to put some effort into it and try to learn singing and songwriter at the Bard College. If his assumption was correct, then, the better he sang the ballads, the greater could be the effect of Orpheus' voice. He could bring out effects greater than what the forging ballads were supposed to achieve. And if he, maybe, added voice of Seth on top? The ballads were something that convinced some higher demonic beings to grant their unholy blessings. If he could persuade them with the linguistic power of a trickster god, wouldn't he be able to buff a ballad's effect through the roof? He couldn't help but release a burst of malicious laughter. Boss. His diabolical laughter was rudely interrupted by Mary, who stood in the door and hid behind her clipboard. She had flourished in the role of a secretary during the last few days. Seth straightened his clothes and played over the fact that he was laughing like a villain seconds ago. Sorry. Mary, how can I help you? I didn't want to interrupt. It's an update on the shop location. Jane has scouted a few potential places and asked you to visit them with her once you have time. Is Jane here? I can come along right away. Originally, he was going to go to the college now, but the day was still young. He could go later. Jane was waiting at the common space. Hey Jane, I heard you had some places to show me. Yep. I'm glad you had time right away. They left Minasmar and the girl started guiding him to different locations for their shop. 2 were in buildings above ground while another 3 were on the subterranean levels below the shopping district. Seth's first shop had been underground, and he really didn't feel like returning there. Even when Earth's sublevels were partly even better than those above ground. He even played with the thought of buying a whole building. Or at least a few floors at once. He had more than 10 million credits and was intent on using a good chunk of it. Jane brought him to the 2 locations above ground. They looked okay, but Seth wanted to give the subterranean layer a chance. The shops below ground were in some of the best locations of the district. The whole layer was filled with shops and stores selling equipment and stuff for adventurers. Gear, potions, food, and miscellaneous items. Everything one needed to travel and enter the dungeons could be found here. He was forced to admit that this place really looked awesome. But what really influenced his decision was the third and last store location. It was also the most expensive one. If he really wanted to buy, he would only be able to buy a single floor of the place. The reason this was the one, was the surroundings. Opposite the empty storefront glowed his name in bright characters, Nico Booze. The little sh, the man responsible for the shameful superhero trend. The show window was filled with mannequins wearing hero suits in bodybuilder poses. This was the place for Seth's store. This was the battlefield he chose. It was not just to show those blinded sheep the true glory of armor. It was also because they didn't share any merchandise. Seth sold weapons, armor, accessories, and potions. Nico Booz was a purist tailor and only sold hero suits, capes and cloaks. If Nico Booz was really as popular as it seemed, then this was a good place to open shop. Superhero suits were cloth armors that could be worn as is. But if someone had the money to look at designer cloth armor, they probably wouldn't skimp on their other gear either. Armor could be worn on top. Accessories were a no-brainer. And who didn't need a weapon? Since he could not buy all 3 stories at once, he told Jane to rent them for now. The first floor would be the uncommon and rare items as well as the potions. The second floor would be reserved for the true gems among the items he was willing to sell. Only those with a recommendation or the necessary money would be allowed on this floor. The third floor would be a restaurant for recommended guests. Here they could serve the meals Link cooked at the tower's kitchen. Thanks to the inventory, it did not really matter where food was cooked. The meals could be brought here and served. This way they could also make money with the food Link grinned to improve his cooking level. The gourmet hunter was putting in a lot of energy ever since he found the kitchen. The man couldn't stop gushing about the appliances like a middle-aged man talking about his sports car. At least this relieved Seth of his duty to make kitchenware for the man. I will talk to the owner right away to finish the deal, Jane answered when he told her that this was the place. And when all the paperwork was done, it would take some more time to furnish the place. Shelved and rack for the products, table and chairs, and decoration for the restaurant. Employees, too. Not just clerks for the shops, but also servers for the restaurant. There was a lot to do, and Seth was glad he could leave it all to his administrative lords. Yes, his lords of administration. He couldn't stop grinning at this label. Maybe he should give the 2 adjacent bureaus in Myanmar and put a sign with it above them. Yeah, they should all have monikers like that. It fit the whole game setting of the system and might even bring good luck to their organization. Who knew? Chapter 258. Voice of Smith. The decision was made, and Jane left to speak with the owner. Seth on the other hand got on his way to visit the Bard College. If he remembered correctly, there would be a singing practice in the afternoon and they planned to join it. He wanted to try and gain the singing skill himself before he ended up buying it at the auction house. If it didn't work, he could still spend the money. The singing skill was very common, and few people looked for it. It still cost a few gold coins, so nobody could call it cheap. He was a little late. When Seth entered the hall, all faces turned to him. He was always a little surprised by the huge variety there was among demons. But what really surprised him was that Ember was also here. Did that demon girl join every singing exercise? Or was it just a coincidence? Probably the first. She struck him as someone very serious about the musical part of the occupation. Sorry for being late. Mr. Smith. You are back faster than expected. I can hear that you have learned the demon language already, very good. Take the lyrics and try to sing along in the choir. Seth took a page of lyrics and remembered to his dismay that music also entailed notes. Demon notes. He hoped with his heart of hearts that the system would give him a skill for this. Until then he would just follow the lead of the rest of the people. Everyone singing the demonic tune at the same time did not just jolt his heart, but the whole room was shuddering as if they were summoning a great demon. But the theme of the song was actually a tragic love story. At first, he only sang along silently, but soon he got in the flow of things and his voice grew stronger and blended with the rest of the choir. This was his voice, no skill. He had turned off Orpheus' voice before he entered the room. He believed it would be easier to get the singing skill if he actually sang alone. Without translation or skill amplification, Seth sang and matched the bards of the choir in power. But he didn't dare to become too loud. There were still mistakes he made that he was well aware of and probably many he was not aware of. But the most important aspect was fulfilled. Seth felt joy singing this foreign music. He felt motivated to learn it not just to further his crafting skills. The mantis kept giving each one tips on what and how to improve as if she could differentiate the voice of every student individually. She often spoke to Seth, but he was thankful for her advice. The lesson took 2 hours, and he could feel his singing audibly improve. After the lesson, Ember approached him in the hallway. Hey, you were pretty good. Thanks, but you could say I just started. I'm still a noob. I don't even have the singing skill, yet. Ember looked at him in surprise. Then some understanding lit in her eyes. You said you were a blacksmith, right? Then it makes sense. Depending on the specialization, such classes can have a rather high threshold to gain more creative skills like singing or painting. Really? Seth knew that classes could increase and decrease the difficulty of gaining skills other than the class skills. He just didn't expect that a relatively common skill like singing could become hard to learn. Yet, no need to worry. If it takes too long, you can probably find the skill scroll in a bookstore. They are not very expensive. A bookstore? I would have looked in the auction house. The auction house? I don't think you would find it there. Common skills like this have no high demand or price. Just ask around town, you should be able to find one, the demon advised. She was suspiciously friendly today. Or had he just misunderstood her? You are very dedicated to music, aren't you? No. No. She looked up in surprise and hurriedly looked away. He was right. She was more earnest when it came to a subject dear to her. Are you joining every singing exercise? Why yes. She said with a blush. Then we will see each other regularly from now on, Seth said with a smile and left. He already had an idea where to get the scroll. A few minutes later. You again, a moody truth opened the door for the second time today. Yep, I have another skill scroll I need you to find for me, he said with a grin. With that, he gave the underemployed demon bard the epic quest of looking for another skill scroll. By the way, maybe you should tell me the name of that apprentice you told me about? It would be helpful in humiliating him or something like that. Oh. Oh, that. Trith stuttered a little in surprise. Don't worry about it. Just show them that you can create tremendous items without specializing in weapons or armor. That will be enough. I don't expect any fast results, so there is no worry to rush it. Suspicious. But okay, I will leave now. With that, Seth returned to Mina's March. Since a location was found and things with the Bard College were more or less settled, the real business would soon get started. It was time to arrange the tower's operations. At the moment everyone did whatever they wanted, that would end soon. It was late afternoon, so Seth decided to invite the 13 lords for a meeting after dinner. All right, I called everyone here to talk about the future operations of Mina's March. I think we should distribute some duties and tasks. Seth started when everyone had arrived. There was already a rough division in the people currently part of Mina's March. Mary and Jane were the administrative support. Link, Evie, Allison, and Seth were crafters and fighters, while Jonah, Monique, Tecker, and the members of Yule Cat's Fur were pure fighters. The recovered Lydia could also be counted among the fighters, though she did not take in the current meeting. She was not a member of the Lords. Seth wanted to split them into 3 divisions. Administration, Production, and Field Service. Field Service would be in charge of gathering materials. Production would refine the materials and supply Field Service and Administration with products. Administration would oversee the store, finances, and logistics. Any more questions or suggestions, after sharing his plan? Nobody had any great ideas for the moment, so they just sat there in silence. Until Bulko surprisingly lifted his hand. I have a suggestion, the otherwise silent giant spoke. Seth gestured for him to continue. We should also have a medical division. Some people should keep the medical wing staffed and get familiar with the facilities. I suggest a healer and a pharmacist as permanent staff, the gentle half-ogre suggested. This sounds reasonable. Seth answered, nodding. It was not a big division but could become important. With a pharmacist, they could also grow herbs and produce potent special medicine. Since it had a different emphasis, a pharmacist would not get in Evie's or Allison's way but cover possible gaps. One thing was clear, they were not enough people to complete such a separation, yet. There was no staff for a medical division, yet. The pure fighters could not form a balanced party without the crafters, so everyone would keep joining them on missions. They could also not fall too far behind in level. And the store could not function with just Mary and Jane. Today they decided on leaders for these divisions. The leader would be responsible to implement the changes to facilitate a clean separation. Like recruiting members. Mary and Jane became the leaders of administration, while Mike and Monique became the leaders of the field service. As the one who suggested it, Bulko got the responsibility for the medical division. Mike was the leader of Yule Cat's Fur and Monique would be responsible for filling the numbers, so her party could function without the crafters. The explosive beauty had a good charisma and fortitude. Seth didn't know whether she would be a good leader, but she had a great wealth of experience. Seth took charge of the production, which literally meant that he did not have to do a lot for now. They did not need more crafters for the moment and everyone else had high-grade facilities. There was only one thing he had to do. Chapter 259. Building a workshop. As his duty in charge of the production, Seth had to make sure everyone had the fitting crafting stations for their work. The only one currently without such a thing was himself. Since it was soon time to open their store, he needed a fitting place for grinding. There were quite a lot of ideas that had built up over the past few weeks that he wanted to implement in his workshop. The first step was choosing the fitting spot. Seth stood in the command room with a 3D hologram of Minas Mar before him. The tower was built at the back of a big empty magma chamber reach from the bottom to the top. The lower floors formed a wide star-shaped base. What Seth wanted for his workshop was access to the magma within the mountain below Delta. He needed to build a smelter powered by an active volcano. Otherwise, he would be unable to refine Olympian silver. Minas Mar, can you show me magma deposits close to our location? Lately he had started calling the tower Ego by the name he had given the tower. Yes, Master. The hologram was refreshed and showed several veins and smaller chambers closer to the tower. They all branched out from a giant magma chamber at the edge of the tower's perception radius. They seemed close, but the closest was actually several hundred meters away. Even with his mining skill, how was he supposed to dig that far? Are you seriously thinking of digging out the rooms yourself? The Lich interjected, flabbergasted. The tower's drones are much more qualified to expand the tower than you are. You mean the maintenance drones? Seth remembered seeing them when the tower was restored after they reactivated it. These creatures looked like biomechanical trilobites. Their shell had a copper sheen, and they were quite fast. There were several floors and laboratories below the ground floor that housed the machinations responsible for their creation and maintenance. Try going into the build modus. It should make everything much easier. Open the build modus. Affirmative. A menu window opened with tools that could be used to add things to the tower's hologram. It reminded Seth of some programs he knew from virtual reality. Though this was much more like augmented reality. Besides manually creating a room, he could also describe to the tower Ego what he wanted, and the tower would automatically show different possible variations. He made one big room as a center. Here he would summon the spirit smithy. All other rooms were adjacent to the center. One would have a channel directly leading to the nearest active magma chamber. Here he could build the special furnace for Olympian silver. Another room was dedicated to the creation of bones of Seth. It was possible for the tower to directly engrave the blood formation into the room's ground. This way he would only need to fill the prepared channels on the ground with the necessary blood instead of drawing it anew every time. Close to this room was an experimental room Seth came up with. The blood baths. The room would house big vats and tanks of blood from many different beasts. These tanks were meant to nurture feasting blanks. This was an idea he had wanted to develop but never had the time before. Now that he was building his own workshop, he could add it from the start. His idea was not complicated. After forging something using the feasting ballad, it would add the adverb of feasting like the feasting blade. With Tord's help, he had found a great synergy between bleeding and life-steal enchantments and the effect. This was the reason he had always turned them into blood drinker weapons immediately. It created the misconception that the feasting only worked in battle because the life-steal effect had changed it that way. At one point he had realized that a pure feasting weapon could grow stronger by just absorbing blood. There was no need to spill it in battle with a weapon. This realization spawned the idea of soaking a feasting weapon in blood, before processing it further into a blood drinker weapon or something else. Like this, he could further strengthen any kind of material he was able to forge with the ballad. All he needed was strong blood. For this purpose, Seth had kept back the blood they had collected during their adventures in the dungeons. The others had looked at him weirdly when he asked Link to also harvest the blood. The blood of most creatures was worthless on the market. But an item would not care. He also planned a separate room for Cerberus and the spirit furnace. Only the crafting stations for smithing and enchantment would be present in the central room. After designing a few more storage rooms and blank rooms for future additions, he confirmed the blueprint. Instructions received. Estimated time until completion, 3 days. Just 3 days. Seth blurted out in surprise. The estimated time can be reduced if power production is increased. How long would it take with more power? 1 to 2 days. No. 3 days is okay. Proceed with the original plan. Seth was not that pressed for time. He was also a little afraid of what could happen if he messed with this. He saw a flood of trilobites filling the hallways of the tower. No need to provoke something like that. Somewhere in Delta. Willis family welcomes esteemed guests in their base of operations. I welcome you to the Willis family. We are happy to accept your invitation. A group of strange men in wide cloaks was greeted by the remains of the Willis family. Their faces were hidden and so were their bodies. Only one among the Willis family had met them before and guaranteed for them. The leader of the strangers and the upper members of the Willis family sat together in a meeting room and recounted what had happened until now. Their hatred for Seth seeped into their every word and speech. "You have done well, calling for us," the mysterious leader said. "Our God gladly lends power to everyone, especially those in need." Suddenly the room was stormed by the followers of the mysterious man, and the remaining leader of the Willis family were all mortally wounded. Only the man that had guaranteed for these traitorous guests was unscathed. "Why?" one among them asked as his life was seeping out of him. The leader crouched down to him. "Didn't you want power? You asked for this. This is the way to ultimate power and eternal life. Trust me." His voice was oozing with sarcasm. "You did very well," he said to the last remaining survivor of the Willis family. "All hail, Zarkan," was the only answer. Nobody cared for the corpses on the ground. Nobody cleaned up. Why would they? A few hours later the corpses woke up, back to newfound unlife. Now, with their souls bound to a foreign god, there were two kinds of reactions. Some regretted their behavior and hesitation. Others found joy in their newfound power. The Willis family was gone. A new branch of Zarkan assimilated them and took their place. Chapter 260. Days of Development. After 3 days the construction work was finished. Seth had moved his smithy from the private quarters to the new workshop. In the meantime, Seth started preparations for the grand opening of their shop. He split his time between visiting the Bard College and making uncommon and rare items for the store's first floor. Some of these items were practice pieces used to learn new ballads and poems. The effects of these items were the ones he was most interested in, but sometimes hard to understand. Most turned out less useful than he had expected. The best one so far was a poem that could multiply the damage of an axe. After a few tries, Seth judged that randomly trying these poems and ballads made little sense before he knew more. That's why he decided to join more lessons at the college to learn about these demons. Proficiency-wise he made almost no progress with these weapons. The only skill that saw some growth was singing. Trith had managed to find a scroll and Seth learned singing, beginner, LV1. Singing in the college with the teacher's guidance helped boost the experience and he had reached Leave 2 within a day. Monique and the others started exploring the dungeons of Delta and farming materials. Seth would also join them in the future so as to not fall too far behind in level. The first thing he did when the workshop was finished was getting rid of all the blood in his inventory and fill it into the different vats for the blood baths. He also added a batch of uncommon feasting weapon made from steel. He put them into the blood of beasts from different levels and ratings. When he was done with that, he entered a room with a small lava pool. The heat was terrible and might have killed a normal human if they stayed too long. To Seth, it just felt slightly warm. Very cozy, actually. Here he followed the instruction from the recipe and built a special furnace that used the power of the lava as fuel. Power did not only mean heat. The whole mountain was a basin for magic, as such the magma inside absorbed a huge amount of it. The molten stone was charged to the brim with pure fire energy. In conjunction with the furnace and the energy manipulation method of Hephaestus, this energy could be used to refine and empower a material. In this case, one needed at least silver. Although it was not the most noble metal, it was known for its purity and conductivity among common metals. To take on the properties of Olympian silver, a metal with high conductivity and magic purity was needed. This meant that it could not have any strong affinities with elements, for example. Judging by these criteria, the next higher step after silver would be either mithril or fey steel. It was different from Bones of Seth, where the main criterion was that the base material was iron and the result increased the more special the iron was. After everything was ready, Seth tested the furnace. Compared to his spirit furnace, it was harder to use and needed stronger concentration to evade mistakes. Whereas using his own furnace felt like swimming in the water, this one was like swimming in mud or tar. Still, Seth had a lot of experience at this point and even had pyrokinesis. The increased difficulty was only a small problem. He managed to refine 10 billion Argentine pesos of ordinary silver into 5 billion Argentine pesos of rare Olympian silver to test the function of the furnace. There were some problems at the start before he got used to the furnace's functions and calibrated them accordingly. However, despite making only small mistakes here and there, it still consumes silver at a ratio of 2:1 to refine the new material. Even considering this, it was still a great deal to be able to turn common metal into a rare rated material. Silver was not hard to get, and the price was also affordable. He also pondered about replenishing his dwindling steel supplies. In the end, he decided against it. He had outgrown the high-quality steel. There was almost no experience to be gained with uncommon or even rare items anymore. The future laid in epic items. He had roughly 150 billion Argentine pesos of bones of Seth and an array of rare metals and beats materials to grind his skills further. He left the last bars of steel in Cerberus smithy and added what was left of the snake materials. He had stopped putting uncommon beasts materials in his inventory. He had kept the materials of the Titanoboa juvenile more out of nostalgia than out of necessity. He left it all in the adjacent storage room so the golem could turn them into blanks. They should be enough to keep the golem busy for a few days. The only materials below rare left in his inventory were the dwarven copper he had left from Aura and the metals he refined from the ores he found on the journey. Seth still had little idea what effects snow copper and volatile zinc could have on an item, but used with the souls from the journey he had some hopes for the first. In the central room, he did not just place his spirit smithy but also added several shelves for the inks Allison and Evie had made in the meantime. A few work tables for general stuff and S-wall for draft and ideas. He had blueprint, but it was often helpful to have everything laid out to get new ideas. Now that the workshop was ready, it was time to make equipment befitting the Lords of Minas Mar. Seth sat down at the design table and thought about what he wanted to do first. Next moment he jumped up and left for the Bard College. The lacking gear the most at the moment was Evie. The immortal witch was a caster and support but could turn into an undead in case she died. This also made the girl quite reckless in battles. What Seth wanted to make was a self-repairing armor. A self-repairing armor for a self-reviving witch. It would assure that no matter how she died, she would be covered by the armor. Alzalsa was unable to help him with that. Of course, he could summon her and leave enchanting the item to her, but that was not the point of the exercise. It would also be harder to gather all the necessary ingredients. He had played with the idea for some time now, but it was the new ballads and etching that made it seem feasible. There were so many demons and possible effects a ballad or inscription could have. All he needed to do was find just the right thing. He confidently entered the library, and his motivation was dampened. Was the library always this big? Not all of these books were about ballads or inscriptions, right? He used the search function and was greeted by an almost endless list of book titles. Maybe Trith the etching teacher knew how to reduce the workload. Step by step he came up with attempts to lessen the burden. He really didn't want to read through all those books. Unfortunately, he could not find the professor for etching. There was no exercise today and he was not at the campus. This left only one final straw. Tirtha's face fell when he saw Seth enter his store again after several days of silence. Seth explained to him his idea of a self-repairing armor. I know a few ballads that have a similar effect. What's your level in enchantment? Journeyman Leave 2. Journeyman Leave 2. You are better than I thought, but it's not enough for the ones I know. I know of some epic ballads and poems, but you would need to be at least craftsman rank. Damn, it could take a while until then. Is there no other way? Trith sat there for a while, thinking. How about an undead armor? He suddenly asked. An undead armor? You mean like those living suits of armor undead? Trith made a complicated expression as he tried to come up with a way to explain it. It's different. What you mean are armors possessed by strong specters. What I mean is to literally turn a piece of armor into a brainless undead. Some undead have HP regeneration after all. Trith stood up and took paper and a pen from the shelf behind him. There are many great demons with necromantic abilities. I know 4 that show a preference for blessing armors. Maybe you can find something fitting in the library if you look for these names. He wrote down Nia and gave Seth the note. This was Seth's best clue. With the small list of possible arcane sugar daddies, he returned to the library to look for already written texts. The result was still a long list of books, but it had become manageable. Seth sat in the library for the rest of the day. When it got dark outside, he had skimmed through most of the books. There were a few promising ballads, but one gave him a huge inspiration. This was technically not a forging ballad, but it fell into a similar category. It asked to borrow the power of the sovereign of unlife to grant false life to a corpse puppet. This puppet would inherit the abilities of the beasts it was made of. In exchange, it was brainless and sustained its unholy existence by feeding off others' life force. This stuff went deep into the practices of necromancers, and Seth needed the Lich's help to understand some of it. The point was, it granted a semblance of life to dead tissue which then needed the power to sustain operations. The inspiration was that he could use this ballad on a leather armor, for example, one made of ice troll leather. The plan was for the leather to gain life and inherit a troll's healing factor. It would only need power when regenerating damage. Seth hoped it would be similar to other enchantments and was able to use an infused soul as a power source. The biggest uncertainty was a special requirement. Not anyone could just call upon a great demon and ask them for a blessing. These chants were far from forging ballads and did not fall under the enchantment skill. The skill demon chanting was needed to cast them. It was a staple for a demon bard who used his musical talents in battle, but not for Seth. But Seth had an idea what he could use as a substitute.